Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 5 creepiest graves ever discovered across the US, Volume 12, we return to the quiet edges of the world, where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights, silence the world. Take a slow breath and let us begin. My name's Aaron Blake. I'm from a little place outside Red Hollow, Ohio, that people only know because of the old highway sign and the cemetery past the last cornfield. And I work as a stock boy at a farm supply store, lifting 50-pound feed bags and salt blocks until my hands stay rough even after I shower. And I need you to listen to me because I have not slept right since last December. And my phone keeps lighting up at 3 a.m. with no one there. And every time I close my eyes, I see that grave behind the house, and I can smell that cold iron stink in my throat again. And I feel like I am still standing there in the snow, trying to tell myself it was just something normal, something with a name, but it was not. And I know how that sounds. I know how it sounds when some kid says something like that, but I am not making anything up. I would not be sitting here in this car by the cemetery gate with the heat barely working. If this was some story, I am worn out and my hands are shaking and I just want it out of me. So I'm going to start with the day before everything got strange, when it still felt like just work and family and cold Ohio winter, because that part is still clear in my head and it is the last thing that feels normal when I rewind it all. It was the first week of December, like the 4th or maybe the 5th. I know it was right after the town put up those cheap plastic wreaths on the light poles because I remember seeing them on my way in. And the sky was that flat gray that just hangs there all day and never really changes. And the air hurt when you breathe too deep. And I had been at work since 7 a.m., stacking dessing salt pallets by the front door with numb fingers. And my manager kept saying it was good hours before Christmas, so I should be grateful. But all I could think about was how my aunt had called my mom the night before, saying we had to get started on cleaning out Grandma's place before the snow came in hard, because the pipes were already acting up and the roof above the back bedroom had a leak. And if we left it, everything would just rot and mold. And then the bank would be on us. Since the house was tied up with some old loan, I do not know all the details. I just know everyone was talking money, and no one was talking about Grandma. Not really. I remember what I had for breakfast that morning because it sat in my stomach like a rock all day. 2 pieces of toast that were a little burned because the toaster sticks on one side, and peanut butter that was almost gone, so I had to scrape the bottom of the jar. And this instant coffee I keep in my room that tastes like burnt dirt. And I ate it standing up while I tried to find my work gloves, and my mom yelled from the hallway asking if I was going to go out to the house after my shift, or if I was going to pretend I did not hear about it. And I said I would go. I said I would meet them there, and she just said, "Good," and slammed the bathroom door, and that was that. I remember what shirt I wore too. It matters to me for some reason. It is this dark green long sleeve with the store logo on the chest. And there is a little rust-colored stain on the cuff from when I cut my hand on a pallet nail a few months ago, and it never washed out all the way. And you can still see where the blood soaked into the cotton if you look close. And I do not know why I keep thinking about that. But I do, especially now, because no matter how much I scrub at it in the sink, it will not fade. It just stays that same shape, and sometimes I feel like it is darker than it used to be. But I tell myself that is just in my head. Anyway, after my shift, which dragged like it was 2 days instead of 1, I clocked out at 4:02 p.m., I remember, because I looked at the time and did the math in my head for my paycheck without really thinking about it. And my hands were still cold, even though I had been inside the last hour, and I walked across the parking lot to my car, this old silver sedan that rattles when you get over 40 and smells like fast food and dust, and my breath came out white when I opened the door and sat down. And for a second, I thought about just going home and saying I forgot. But my phone buzzed, and it was a text from my aunt asking how far out I was. And I just typed, "On my way," and started the engine. And that is how I ended up back at that house after dark with the cemetery behind it. The house had belonged to my grandmother's family forever. That is how it felt anyway. Everybody called it the Blake place, even when Grandma married and changed her last name for a while. And it sits on this little strip of land off a county road that hardly anyone uses since they built the new bypass. And behind the house is a field that used to be corn. And then past that, between some skinny trees, is the family burial plot. Just a handful of old stones behind a sagging wire fence, not part of the big town cemetery down the road. This was just ours, if that makes sense. Just the Blakes and some names I never heard of. And when I was little, they told me not to play back there because the fence was rusty and there were groundhog holes. But of course I did sometimes, until I saw a rabbit dead on one of the graves. And it looked wrong to me. Not bloody or anything. Just wrong, like it was not supposed to be there. And I stopped going after that. By the time I pulled up that day, it was already getting dark in that way where it is not night, but the light has this purple tint, and everything in the distance looks like a shadow. And the air felt heavier out there than it had in town. Like it was thicker around the house. And I told myself that was just because the wind always dies down between the trees. My mom's car was already there, and my uncle's truck, and I parked behind them and sat with my hands on the steering wheel for a minute, watching my own breath fog the inside of the windshield, trying not to look past the barn because I knew if I did, I would see those stones back there, pale against the dark ground. My aunt stepped out onto the porch before I even killed the engine, wrapped in a big brown coat with her hair pulled under a knit hat, and she waved in that sharp way she has, like she is mad even when she is not, and I could see yellow light from the kitchen behind her, and for a second, it almost looked normal. Like when Grandma would stand there with a dish towel in her hand and yell at me to wipe my feet before coming in. But then I remembered she was gone, and that made my chest feel tight all over again. Inside the house, it smelled like dust and old wood, and underneath that, something damp, like when a basement has flooded and nobody opened the windows afterward. And my mom was in the living room, sorting through a box of photo albums, and my uncle was fiddling with the thermostat, saying the furnace was making a noise it never used to make, and they all talked about pipes and insurance and what to do with the furniture. And they gave me the job nobody else wanted, which was to go out back and check the old shed for anything worth keeping, see if the lawn equipment still worked, see if there were tools that could be sold, that kind of thing. I tried to argue for a second, said I could help with the boxes instead, but my uncle just said I was the one still young enough to walk in the cold without complaining. And then he clapped me on the shoulder and handed me a flashlight from the hook by the back door. And that was that. So I put on my coat and my hat and the cheap work gloves I keep in my pocket, and I stepped out the back door onto the little concrete stoop. And the cold hit me in the face so hard my eyes watered. And the sky was darker now, more blue than gray, and the first little bits of snow were starting to fall. Just a few flakes, twirling in the light from the porch, and I could see my breath in front of me like smoke. The shed is out past the barn, closer to the back of the property, and the ground between the house and the shed is uneven, with patches of dead grass and hard dirt and old tire ruts, and my boots crunched on the thin skin of ice over puddles, and the flashlight beam bounced ahead of me. And I kept telling myself I would just go in, check, come back, no big deal. The thing is, from that path, if you keep walking instead of turning at the shed, you end up right at the family plots, because the land slopes down and the trees thin out, and past them, you can see the leaning stones and the wire fence. And I was trying not to look that way. I really was. But you know how it is when you tell yourself not to look at something. Your eyes go there anyway. So as I walked toward the shed, just as I passed the corner of the barn, I let my eyes slide to the right, past the sagging fence line. And that is when I saw it for the first time. Only I did not understand what I was seeing then, and I told myself a regular explanation. And for about an hour, I believed it. There is this one grave back there that I always noticed more than the others. It is not the oldest one or the biggest one. It just sits a little off from the rest, closer to the trees, and the stone has a crack running down through the nameplate, like a line through a word in a notebook. And even when I was little, I hated walking near that one. I do not know why, I just did. And that evening, when I glanced over, my flashlight beam caught that stone, and I saw dark, wet streaks running down from the base over the frozen grass, like something had spilled, and at first I thought it was just meltwater, like maybe the ground was soft there, and it had bubbled up. But then I realized the air had been below freezing all day, and the ground around it looked hard and pale except for that one patch. And there was steam coming off it, just a little, like when you open a dishwasher, and the snowflakes that were landing on the wet part were disappearing, not melting into droplets and then freezing, just vanishing. I stopped walking without meaning to, just froze there with one boot half in the air, and I aimed the flashlight straight at it, and the beam shook a little in my hand, and the longer I looked, the less it looked like water, and the more it looked like something thicker, like oil or syrup, only it was the wrong color, too dark, and it glistened in a way I do not have a good word for, like it was moving under the surface even when it was still. I told myself right then that it was probably some kind of chemical, like old fuel or something. Maybe a tank had leaked back there, or maybe my uncle had dumped waste oil years ago and it was seeping up, and I actually nodded to myself. Like that settled it, and I turned my light away and kept going to the shed, even though the back of my neck felt tight, like someone was watching me from the trees. In the shed, it was just dust and spider webs and the smell of gasoline that had gone bad, and I found an old push mower, a broken weed trimmer, some hand tools, a rusty vise, nothing special. And I dragged what I could closer to the door so my uncle could look at it later. And the whole time, even though the flashlight was propped on a shelf pointing at the floor, I kept imagining that if I turned it a little to the left, I would see that wet patch creeping closer, which is a stupid thought because the ground does not move like that. But that is what my brain was doing. I do not know how long I was in there. Maybe 40 minutes, maybe less. Time gets weird when you are cold and your fingers hurt. And when I stepped back out, the snow was coming down harder, big flakes now, and there was already a thin layer on the roof of the barn, and the fence posts, and I could hear the wind in the bare branches, and the sky had gone even darker without really being night yet. I should have gone straight back to the house. That would have been the smart thing. Just walk the path, ignore the rest, shut the door behind me, and tell them what I found in the shed. But as I passed that point again, where you can see the graveyard clearly between the trees, something in me needed to check. Like if I looked and it was gone, I could laugh at myself later and blame it on being tired. So I stopped and turned and walked a little off the path toward the fence, crunching through grass that was half frozen and half slush now. And when I got close enough to see over the low wire, I planted my boots and raised the flashlight and aimed it straight at that stone. The dark wet was still there, only now there was more of it. A wide stain around the base of the grave, soaking into the ground, and the snow on either side was piling up. But the snow over that patch kept vanishing, and I swear to you, I swear to God, it looked like the ground itself was breathing, the way the surface shimmered in the cold, like it was pushing up from underneath in slow pulses. And the smell hit me then. The kind of smell you never forget, even if you want to. Not rot, not sewage. Something metallic and hot in the middle of all that cold air. Like when you cut your finger deep and put it under hot water, and the steam gets in your nose, only stronger. And for a second, I had to swallow hard not to gag, and my eyes watered, and not from the wind. I stood there way too long, just watching that stain. And I did not realize how quiet it had gotten until my own breathing sounded loud in my ears. There is usually road noise out there, even faint, from the highway a couple miles off, trucks going by. But right then, I could not hear anything but the wind far off, and this tiny wet sound near my boots, like slow dripping. And I felt this stupid, crazy thought slide into my head that if I stepped over the fence and got closer, I would hear something under the ground, like a heartbeat. And my body actually leaned forward a little before something in me snapped, and I forced myself to step back toward the barn, muttering that it was just some kind of leak, that I should tell my uncle, that it could be a busted septic or something. Anything. Back inside the house, everything felt too bright and too loud, and my aunt was in the kitchen banging cabinet doors, looking for a baking dish she thought Grandma had. And my mom was arguing with my uncle about whether to keep the old couch, and when they saw me covered in snow, they asked if the shed had anything worth saving. And I said some stuff, and I almost mentioned the grave, I really did. But the words stuck, and I told myself again that it was nothing, and I just said I would go down to the basement next, help with some boxes, and that is what I did until about 7, when they decided to call it a night. Now here is where it starts to bend, so stay with me. As we were getting ready to leave, my aunt realized she could not find the box, where she had put Grandma's important papers. The ones about the house, wills and deeds and all that, and she got this tight look on her face and said we could not just leave without them. And my uncle said maybe Grandma had kept them somewhere weird, like in her room or in one of the drawers by the back door. And my mom said she remembered Grandma once talking about hiding things in plain sight, and they all started opening drawers and boxes again, like they had not just spent hours doing that. And I stood there feeling useless until my aunt looked at me and said, maybe check the old desk upstairs, the one in the front bedroom, because Grandma used to write letters there. And sometimes old folks keep stuff stuck in the backs of drawers, you know? And I agreed just to have something to do. The upstairs of that house always felt odd to me, even when I was a kid. The ceilings low and the floors sloping just a little, and the air different, like whoever built it did not care if it lined up with the rest of the world. And as I went up the narrow steps, my flashlight bouncing off the walls because the hallway light at the top flickered and then died, I could feel the cold more up there, like the heat from the furnace never really reached that part, and I had to pull my coat tighter as I walked down to the front bedroom. The desk was against the window, the same old wooden thing I remembered from childhood, with a blotter stained with ink and a lamp without a bulb. And as soon as I pulled the top drawer, there was just junk, pens that did not work, old envelopes, some yellowed receipts, nothing important. And I almost stopped there, but my aunt's voice kept nagging in my head. So I pulled the smaller side drawer, and that is where I found it. This thin stack of papers tied with twine. Not in a folder, just loose sheets, some lined, some not, all with Grandma's handwriting. At first I thought it was just recipes or letters, but on the top page, in the corner, she had written burial plot notes, and the date was from about 10 years ago, and my stomach dropped a little, because I knew that meant the family grave's out back. I should have taken it straight downstairs, I know that now, but something about seeing those words made me sit down on the edge of the bed and flip through them, telling myself I was just checking if it was what my aunt wanted, and the light from the street lamp outside the window came through the thin curtain enough that I could read without the flashlight. The pages were just her neat, shaky handwriting, listing names and dates, who was buried where, little notes about great uncles and cousins I never met. And then, halfway through the stack, there was a page that did not look like the others. The lines were darker, her writing more jagged, like she had been upset, and there was no heading, just a date from a December 5 years before. And then this one sentence she had written 3 times down the page, like she was trying to get it right or trying to make herself believe it. He would not stay cold. That is what it said, over and over. No name, no explanation, just that. Under the 3rd line, she had written something else, smaller, like she did not want anyone to see it. Ground wet in winter, stains will not wash. I do not stand near him after dark. I felt my mouth go dry reading that, and I thought right away of that grave with the crack and the stain and the smell, and in my head I could see the wet patch in the snow. Even though I was upstairs, and I swear the room felt colder all of a sudden, I flipped the pages looking for more, thinking maybe she had written which grave she meant, but there was nothing. Just more lists, and I heard my mom call up the stairs asking if I had found anything, and my first instinct was to hide that page, fold it and put it in my pocket. But my hands were shaking, and I just stacked the papers back together and carried them down. I did not mention what I had read. I just handed the bundle to my aunt and said it might be the deed stuff, and she nodded and put them in a box, and everybody acted relieved. And then we all got our coats on and went out into the cold. And I tried so hard not to look past the barn, not even once, but as I got into my car, I saw, in my side mirror, the faint outline of the graveyard between the trees. And I swear I could still see steam rising in the dark, even though it was snowing harder now and everything else was covered. That night, I went home, took a long hot shower, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. You know, just a weird thing my brain would file under strange but explainable. And I even told myself if I went back in daylight, it would look normal. But that is not how it went. The next morning, my uncle texted the family group chat that the water line to the house had finally given out, and he needed help shutting it off and maybe digging where the pipe came in, because there was some flooding near the back. And my mom had work, and my aunt said her back was killing her, so it fell to me again to go out there and be the one to tromp around in the cold. I did not want to, but it was not like I could say no without admitting I was scared of a patch of ground. When I drove out there the second day, it was earlier, late morning, and the sun was this pale white disk behind more clouds, and the snow from the night before had left a few inches on the ground, enough to crunch under my boots, and I could see rabbit tracks and maybe a fox along the ditch, but none of them went anywhere near the back of the property, which I only noticed later when I thought about it. My uncle was already at the house when I pulled in, standing by the side of the foundation with his hands on his hips, staring at the ground near the pipe entry. And he said he thought the leak might be near there because the soil was softer. And he handed me a shovel and said we should at least try to dig down a bit, see if it was something simple before calling a plumber. For a while, that is all I focused on, just the work, driving the shovel into the cold ground, feeling my shoulders burn under my coat, listening to my uncle talk about how the house should have been updated years ago, how grandma never let anyone fix anything properly, how everything always had to be done her way. At some point, he told me to take a break and go around back to see if any water was pooling near the old well, and I knew exactly what that meant. It meant walking out there again, but I did not argue. I just nodded and stepped away, my breath coming out in quick clouds. As I walked past the barn this time, I noticed something I had not the night before. There were animal tracks all over the yard, deer and rabbits mostly, little double prints in the snow, but then as the prints got closer to the trees near the graveyard, they just stopped. Not turned aside, not scattered, just stopped, like the animals had turned back in the same trail or vanished. It could have been nothing. Maybe I was reading patterns where there were none, but it made the back of my neck prickle again, and I almost turned around. Instead, I kept going, my boots squeaking in the fresh snow, and when I reached the point where I could see the family plot through the trees, I made myself look, because not looking felt worse. The graves were all lined with white now, little snow caps on the stones, except for one. You already know which one. the cracked stone. Around it, there was a wide bare ring, maybe 3 feet across, where the snow had not stuck at all, and the soil inside that ring was dark and shiny and wet. And even from where I stood, I could see small ripples moving across the surface, like something stirred underneath. There was no frost on the stone itself either, just a sheen of moisture. And every few seconds, a bubble broke on the surface of the wet ground and sent out a little ripple toward the edges. And the snow that tried to drift into that circle turned to vapor and disappeared. I do not know how long I stared that time, just that my fingers started to hurt even inside my gloves, and my breath grew shallow, and the smell came again, stronger in daylight somehow, that metallic hot smell in the middle of all that cold air. And I had this sudden, clear thought that if I made a sound, any sound, whatever was under there would hear me. I know how that sounds, like a movie, but I am telling you, it was not like that. It was just this tight feeling inside me, like my body knew something my brain refused to say out loud. I wanted to turn and walk away, but my feet would not move at first, and that is when I started hearing it, or thinking I heard it. I still cannot be sure. It was not a voice, not exactly, not words, more like a pattern in the sound of the wet ground, a rhythm to the little bubbles and shifts, and it lined up with my heartbeat in this sick way. Faster when I breathed faster, slower when I held my breath, and for one long moment, it felt like something under there was adjusting to me, to the fact that I was there, like when someone in the dark turns their head towards you, even if you cannot see them. I whispered, "No," without meaning to, just that one word, and the sound of it in the cold air made my skin crawl, and the rhythm of the wet ground paused, just for a second, and then resumed, not quite the same. I backed away then, finally, almost tripping over a root, and I forced myself to walk, not run, back toward the house, telling myself over and over that it was just a leak, just a spring, just something natural, even while the smell clung to the inside of my nose. When I told my uncle there was no water pooling near the old well and that everything looked frozen solid, I did not mention the grave, and he just grunted and went back to digging, and we spent another hour out there before giving up and calling a plumber, and I went home again, and that should have been the end, but it kept pulling at me. That night, the first dream came. I do not want to get into every detail. Just know that in the dream, I was standing in the family plot. Only there were no stones, just flat ground, and the snow was falling harder than I have ever seen. And every flake that hit the ground near my boots turned into a red smear and slid toward a hole that I could not see. And I kept trying to step back, but the ground tilted, and I woke up with the taste of that metallic smell in my mouth, and my sheets twisted around my legs, and my phone said it was 3:07 a.m., and there were 3 missed calls from an unknown number with no voicemail, and the call log said they all came in at 3:03. The same thing happened 2 nights later, and the night after that. Always a dream of snow and dark ground. Always that smell. Always calls at 3:03 from a number that never left a message. I blocked it, but it kept coming through as unknown, and I started leaving my phone face down, but I could still feel it buzz on the nightstand, and I would lay there in the dark, pretending I did not hear it. I stopped telling my friends I would hang out because I felt too tired all the time, like the dream had drained real sleep out of me, and I snapped at my mom for no reason, and she just said grief hits people differently, and maybe I should talk to somebody, and I said I was fine, even though I knew I was not. A few days after that, right before the plumber finally came, my aunt asked me to go back to the house again, this time to move some boxes in the attic, because there was a new leak from the roof, and she was worried the cardboard would get soggy. And I said yes because saying no would mean explaining why, and I could not do that, because there was no way to explain. I think something under Grandpa's cousin's grave is noticing me. I drove out there in the early afternoon, when the sun was a little higher, but still behind clouds, and I told myself I would not look past the barn. I would go straight from the driveway to the front door and not even glance toward the back. And I almost made it too. But as I stepped out of the car, I heard something, faint, like a distant slosh or a shovel cutting into wet soil, and it came from behind the house. And my chest tightened, and I shut the car door harder than I needed to, and went inside without looking. Up in the attic, it was dust and old clothes and boxes of holiday decorations. Nothing strange, but the noise kept playing in my head, and every time the house creaked, I jumped. At one point, I swear I heard the back door open and close downstairs, but when I called out, nobody answered, and when I went down later, my car was still the only one in the drive. I kept telling myself old houses make noises, pipes groan, wood shifts, all that. But then, when I was in the hallway by the back door, putting on my coat to leave, I saw them. And that is when I stopped being able to tell myself anything. Near the back door, there is this little mat where everyone wipes their boots, and next to it is a low shelf where Grandma used to keep a brush and some old rags for cleaning mud off shoes. And on the shelf that day, propped up against the wall, were my work gloves. The same cheap gloves I kept in my coat pockets, the ones I had been wearing outside both days. Only I knew for a fact I had not taken them off in the house this time, because I had left them in my coat when I went up to the attic. But here they were, laid out neatly, palms up, and the cuffs were stained with something dark, darker than mud, and the smell hit me before I even picked them up. That same metallic hot smell, only now stronger. I checked my coat pockets, and the gloves were not there, just cold fabric. And I stood in that hallway with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck, staring at those gloves, and I did not want to touch them. But I also could not leave them, because that would mean leaving them in Grandma's house for someone else to find. And I had this stupid impulse to hide all of this, like it was my mess somehow. So I grabbed the cuffs with 2 fingers, trying not to let the dark stains touch my skin. And I could feel that the fabric was damp and heavier than it should have been. And I shoved them into a plastic grocery bag I found in the cabinet and knotted it tight. And the whole time I was doing that, I had this clear picture in my head of the grave out back, the wet ground, and the way the dark liquid had spread around the base. And my brain made a connection I did not want. That maybe I had stepped too close. Maybe something had soaked up through the soil onto my boots, and from there onto the gloves. But that did not explain how they got on the shelf, laid out like that. And a colder thought sat behind all the other ones, quiet but solid, that maybe I had not stepped close enough and something wanted me to. I took that bag of gloves home and shoved it in the outside trash can, and I washed my hands until the skin cracked at the knuckles, even though I could not see anything on them. And that night, I did not dream, but I did wake up again at 3:03 a.m. to see my phone screen lit with another missed call from unknown, and this time there was a voicemail icon. I thought about ignoring it, letting it sit there, but the little blue dot on the screen would not stop staring at me. So I put on headphones and pressed play with my thumb hovering over the stop button. At first, there was just static, the kind you get when the signal drops, and I almost ended it right there. But then I heard something under it, faint, a wet, slow sound, like thick liquid being stirred, and then another sound layered over that, like someone dragging their nails slowly along wood from the other side. And then, very far away and muffled, I heard my own name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken in a flat, careful tone. Aaron. My whole body went rigid. It sounded like my grandmother, but not exactly, like someone using her voice from a distance. And I yanked the headphones off and threw the phone across the bed, and it hit the wall and fell on the floor. And I sat there breathing hard, staring at it, waiting for it to light up again. It did not that night, but my heart would not slow down. And every time my eyes started to close, I would hear that voice again in my head, that flat tone, saying my name over that wet sound. The next day, I took my phone to the store and told them it had some glitch and I wanted a new number, and they set it up. And I thought that would be enough, but the first night with the new number, at 3:03, the screen lit up with unknown, and I turned it off and put it in a drawer and sat there in the dark, listening to the silence, waiting to hear a ring that would not come because the phone was off. But somehow I knew whoever or whatever was making those calls did not care about numbers. I wish I could say it stopped when we finally sold the house. We did, about a month later, after the plumber fixed the line and some guy from out of town decided he wanted a rural getaway and bought it cheap. My mom cried when we signed the papers. My aunt looked relieved. My uncle just said it was about time, and nobody mentioned the family plot behind the house because nobody ever does, not in the official stuff. The new owner said something about liking the idea of old family history on the property, and my stomach twisted. But I did not say anything, because what was I supposed to say? Do not walk past the cracked stone. Do not go out there in winter. Do not stand near him after dark. The last time I was on the property was the day we finished moving the last of the furniture out. It was late afternoon, the light already going thin, and the snow that had fallen earlier was crusted with ice. My mom and aunt were in the car with the engine running, waiting on me and my uncle to lock up. He went back inside one last time to check the basement, and I found myself standing alone by the back door, my hand on the key in the lock, and I could see my breath puff in front of me, and for some reason, I could not make myself turn it. Instead, I stepped off the stoop and walked past the barn, my boots crunching on the icy ground, my body moving like it knew where it was going without me deciding. I told myself I was just saying goodbye, that I would stand at the fence, look once, and then walk away for good, and that if I did that, maybe the calls would stop, maybe the dreams would fade. When I reached the tree line, I saw something new. There were tracks in the snow leading toward the family plot. Human footprints, not mine, too big. With a tread pattern I did not recognize, like heavy boots, and they went right up to the wire fence, then over it, and then around that cracked stone in a slow circle, and then back out the way they came. I followed them with my eyes, my heart hammering, and when my gaze reached the stone, my breath caught. The ring around it was larger now, maybe 5 feet across, bare ground in a world of white, and the dark wet surface inside it was still, but only in the way a held breath is still, and the stone itself had something new on it. The crack was the same, the top was the same, but where the name had always been worn and hard to read, now the letters were clean, sharper somehow, like someone had traced them recently. Only it was not an old family name I did not recognize anymore. It was mine. Aaron Blake, chiseled into the stone, clean and straight, and below that, a birth year that was mine, and a dash and then a blank. I stared at that stone so hard my eyes hurt, waiting for the letters to blur back into the old name I remembered, waiting for my brain to admit it was a trick of the light, a layer of snow, anything. But the more I stared, the clearer it got, like the air around it was warmer and there was no frost to hide the lines. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again, and it was still there, my name on a grave that was not mine, the ground at its base, wet and dark and waiting. My knees went weak, and I grabbed the fence with one hand to steady myself, and the wire bit into my glove, and the smell hit me again, stronger than ever, and it felt like the air around that circle was thicker, like if I stepped over it, I would not be able to pull my legs back out. I did not hear any words that time, no voice, but I felt something, like attention, like being seen from under the ground, and it was the worst feeling I have ever had in my life. Worse than hearing about Grandma dying, worse than anything. It was not hate or anger. It was something else. This heavy, patient interest, like whatever was down there had all the time in the world, and now it had found a new way to make sure it would not be forgotten. I do not know how long I stood there, gripping that fence, but my uncle's shout from the back porch snapped me out of it. He yelled my name, asking what I was doing, said we were late, and I tore my eyes away from the stone and turned back toward the house. And when I looked back once more, just before the barn blocked my view, the letters on the stone were faded again, worn and shallow. And the name did not look like mine anymore, just an old family name I could not quite make out. The ring of bare ground was still there though, and the dark wetness, and I did not need to see more. I locked the back door with hands that felt like they were not mine, and I did not look out the kitchen window, and I walked to the car and got in and stared straight ahead while my mom and aunt talked about dinner plans. And when we pulled away from the house, I watched it shrink in the rearview mirror and told myself I would never go back. That should be the end, right? The part where I say it was all stress and grief and bad sleep, and that once the house was sold, everything went back to normal. But I am sitting here in my car by the cemetery gate miles from that property, and my phone is in the cup holder with the screen face down, and I can feel that it has been buzzing every night at 3:03, even when it is on silent, even when I buy a new one, even when I turn it off. The dreams are not every night anymore, but that almost makes it worse, because I never know when I am going to wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth and the sound of slow, thick movement in my ears. Sometimes I am not even in the family plot in the dream anymore. Sometimes I am in the town cemetery by the highway, the one with the flagpoles and the neat rows, or the little churchyard with the bell tower, or the graveyard I am parked next to right now, where the wind rattles the plastic flowers and the ground is frozen solid. And in the dream, there is always one stone that looks a little sharper than the others, and one patch of ground where the snow does not stick. And I know if I walk over to it, my name will be there waiting. I do not walk past cemeteries if I can help it now. I drive different routes, even if it adds 10 minutes. If I see headstones from the road, I turn the radio up and stare straight ahead and pretend I do not feel that pull in the back of my mind, like someone tapping on a window. I do not go to funerals. When my friend's dad passed last month, I sent flowers and said I was sick because the thought of standing near an open grave made my hands go cold and my vision blur. I used to walk through the little churchyard shortcut on my way home from school, cut between the rows because it saved me 5 minutes, and now I cross the street and walk the long way around the block, watching my feet the whole time so I do not accidentally read a name. If I see a stone at all, I cannot help but look at the dates, and I am scared that one day I am going to see mine again, carved where it should not be. I tried to throw away the memory, tried to tell myself it was just a trick of light and a tired brain. But every winter when the first snow comes, I find myself thinking about that ring of bare ground, about the way the snow vanished when it touched it, about Grandma's handwriting on that page saying he would not stay cold. I looked for those papers again once, a few weeks after we moved everything out. Thought maybe if I read them in full, they would make it make sense. But my aunt said she cannot find that stack anymore, says she must have misplaced it. And she looked right at me and said, maybe she imagined it, which I know is not true because I held them in my hands. I think about that sometimes, about something in that house wanting those words gone, wanting the record changed so it could write a new name in the only place that mattered. I do not know what is under that grave, not really. I do not think it is a story like people tell about some man who made a deal or some curse on the land. I think it is simpler and worse. I think it is just someone who refused to be forgotten, who held on so hard that the ground could not keep them down the way it was supposed to. And now the soil itself remembers for him, in winter especially, when everything else goes quiet. It is like the world made a promise there, and then realized it could not break it without help. So it looks for new names, new ways to keep the memory fresh. I know how that sounds. I know if you have never stood in front of ground that breathes in the middle of a snowfield, it just sounds like some scared kid making patterns out of grief and cold wind. But I am telling you, man, I am telling you, when you see your own name on a stone that should not have it, and you feel something under your feet, pay attention, like a dog lifting its head, you do not ever go back to normal. You start counting cemeteries on every drive. You start checking the names on plastic wreaths in the grocery store floral section, just to make sure none of them match yours. You start waking up at 3:03, even if the phone does not ring, heart racing, ears straining for a sound that might be a drip or a heartbeat or something else. I am talking into this phone right now because I do not know what else to do with it. If I turn it off, it will still feel like it is buzzing. If I throw it away, the next one will ring. If I change my number again, the calls will still find me. So I'm telling you instead, whoever you are, sitting warm somewhere with your own problems, I am telling you because I feel like the more this story stays just inside my head, the stronger it gets, like that wet ground pushing up in pulses under the snow. Maybe if someone else hears it, it will spread out thinner, be less heavy on me. Or maybe I am just making myself feel better for a minute. All I know is this winter is setting in again. The air has that taste it gets before the first real snow, and I have started seeing little rings in random patches of frost on my way to work. Bare spots where the grass shows through in a perfect circle, and I walk around them without thinking, my chest tight. And I do not look for names around them because I am scared of what I will see. If you ever find yourself near a grave, any grave, and the snow will not stick around it, and the ground looks wet when everything else is frozen, do not stand there trying to figure it out. Do not lean on the fence and tell yourself it is just a spring or a broken pipe. Do not wait to see your own name appear where it should not be. Just turn around and walk away, even if it feels like the earth itself is tugging at your ankles. Change your route. Turn your music up when you drive past any place for the dead. And if your phone ever rings at 3:03 a.m. and no one is there when you answer, and later when you play the voicemail, you hear something slow and thick under the static and a voice that sounds almost like somebody you loved saying your name in a careful, flat tone, then you will understand why I cannot sleep, why I am parked out here by a cemetery gate in a car that needs a new battery, watching my own breath fog the windshield while I talk to a cracked phone screen like it is the only thing listening. I am not asking you to believe me. Not really. I know how this sounds. But if, next time it snows, you see a small grave at the edge of a yard, or behind a house, or past a fence, and there is a bare ring around it where the white will not stay, I hope you remember this and keep walking, because I did not. And now winter feels less like a season and more like a reminder, every year, that somewhere out past the last cornfield near Red Hollow, Ohio, there is a grave that bleeds in winter and a patch of earth that will not stay cold, and my name has already been there once. My name's Linda Carver. I'm from a place called Milner outside Augusta, in Maine, where the road thins out before the woods start, and I worked 38 years as a nurse on the medical floor at St. Mary's Hospital before they finally told me to go home and stay home. And I am sitting in my car right now with the engine off and the dash light barely on, parked just outside the old cemetery, and my hands will not stop shaking, so I'm just going to keep talking until I get it all out. Because if I stop, I am going to start watching the fence instead of the road, and I cannot do that again. I woke up that first day before any of this started at 5:30 in the morning because my knees were aching. Not from work this time, but from the cold that settles in the trailer when the propane kicks low overnight. And I remember because the clock on the nightstand said 5:32 in those red numbers that glow, even when the power flickers. I made instant coffee in the chipped white mug with the faded apple on it, the same one I have had since my first apartment. And I tore open one of those little oatmeal packets with the fake maple flavor and poured it into a plastic bowl that still had a tiny scratch of sauce on the side from the night before because I had been too tired to scrub it all the way. I had on my gray sweater with the missing button near the bottom, the one my sister Jill used to make fun of, and an old pair of jeans that were starting to wear thin at the knees. It was the 3rd anniversary of the day we put her in the ground, and I had told myself I was going to go up to Orchard Hill Cemetery before lunch to sit by her stone for a bit. Nothing big, just the way people say they will drop by a neighbor's house on the way back from the store. I checked my phone at 7:08 because the bank sends those text alerts in the morning, and I remember thinking the number looked smaller than it should, and then I told myself not to look at it again. Orchard Hill is not big. It is up past the last gas station, where the road bends and the trees crowd in close. And if you did not already know where to turn, you would think that little dirt track was only for hunters. There is a chain link fence with the green plastic coating peeling off and a metal gate that sticks on damp days, so you have to put your shoulder into it to get in. And inside there are maybe 100 stones, 200 at most, with the older ones leaning or sinking into the ground. When I first started coming, the town still sent someone to cut the grass regular. Lately, it is just a man named Rick who does 2 cemeteries and the town common, and he is always behind. The ground there holds water. Even if the week has been dry, your shoes get damp if you step off the little gravel path. The plastic flowers people leave get grimy, and when the wind comes off the trees, you can hear them rattle against the wire stems. There is a wooden sign at the entrance that says, Orchard Hill, in letters that were once white and are now a sort of gray. And the bottom of the letters has green streaks from where the moss climbed up, and no one bothered to scrub it off. I do not go in for angels and all that, but I still bring fresh flowers from the grocery store, usually the cheaper ones, the mixed bunch with the yellow and white that can handle a bit of cold. That morning I picked up a bouquet when I went for milk, because it felt wrong to go up there with nothing in my hands. By the time I drove up, it was late morning, not early like I had planned. The dashboard clock said 11:23. The sky was clear, but the air had that wet feel that gets into your sleeves even if there is no rain. I parked on the shoulder just outside the gate, turned the key to kill the engine, and sat there for a second longer than usual because a truck had just passed and stirred up dust that hung in the sunlight. Nothing felt strange yet. This is important. I keep coming back to this part. There was nothing in me that expected anything except the usual quiet, the same headstones, the same walk up the little path to the right where Jill's plot is. 3rd row from the back, 2 stones in from the tall pine. I remember locking the car out of habit and hearing the beep echo a little bit. It sounded louder than it should have in a place with no houses. Then I pushed the gate. It scraped on the ground and then jumped free the way it always does, and I stepped inside, and all I thought was that I should have brought different shoes because the gravel was getting into the crack in the sole of my left one. The first time I noticed anything wrong was with a grave that is not hers. It is a little way down from the main path, on a small slope where the ground dips. The stone is simple, just a name and 2 dates, no carved flowers, no little photograph stuck in a frame, nothing like that. For years, I hardly looked at it. It is in that section where they put people whose family is not around much. You can tell because the grass stays longer there, and the plastic flowers are bleached almost white. That day, I saw it because the sun was behind me, and there was this shadow stretching out in front of me on the path. At first, I thought it was mine, and then I realized the angle was wrong. The sun was to my left and behind, so my shadow should have fallen more across the path. But there it was angled strange, like it was reaching down toward that stone on the slope. I stopped walking and looked over, annoyed more than anything, wondering if there was a branch or something sticking up that was throwing it off. The stone itself sat straight. The name carved on it was Aaron L. Dean, 1954 to 2019. I remember that clearly because I said it out loud without meaning to. I did not know an Aaron Dean. The surface was smooth under a bit of moss, and the shape of the stone was ordinary. Then I noticed that the stone had its own shadow, falling to the right across the grass. That made sense. The sun was still where it should be, but when I looked back at the ground, I saw another shape there, darker, almost pressed into the dirt beside the first one, like someone kneeling even though there was nothing there. For a second, I thought my eyes were just adjusting. Shadows can look odd on uneven ground. I am not a child. I have walked enough hospital halls at night, with only the exit signs for light, to know that the mind can make corners into figures if you let it. I blinked. The second shadow did not move with my blinking. It did not match anything I could see in that row. It stayed as if it had been painted on. I remember saying out loud, "This is dumb," and forcing myself to walk on. Because Jill's stone was up the hill, and I had not come there to stare at someone else's plot. By the time I reached hers, the air around me felt thicker, not colder, just heavy. The way it does right before a storm, when the clouds have not moved in yet, but you can tell something is building. I set the flowers down. Her stone is small because that was all we could afford without going into debt. And my hand shook a little when I straightened the plastic vase that sits in the ground beside it. I told her about the hospital gossip, about the new girl on nights who could not handle the sound of the ventilators. Told her the way I always did, my voice low and steady, as if she could hear, as if saying normal things could somehow turn the ground into just dirt and not a divider. I tried to push away that other image, the second dark shape on someone else's grave, but my eyes kept wanting to slide back over my shoulder, down the hill. I stayed 20 minutes. I know because my phone buzzed with an alert at 11:48. When I finally turned to go, I could not help it. I looked down toward the Dean stone again. From where I stood, I should not have been able to see much detail. Just the row, the line of markers, the tree to the left. Instead, my eyes caught that same place on the grass, and my stomach pulled tight. The stone still had its normal shadow. Next to it, a second darker patch still lay beside it, a shape that did not match the stone or the tree or anything else. It had not shifted with the sun. I told myself I was being dramatic. I walked back to the gate, trying to put my mind on my grocery list. On the thing the doctor had said about my blood pressure last visit. At the gate, I had to push harder than usual to get it open. The metal screeched and then hopped, and for some reason that sound made my teeth hurt. When I got to the car, I unlocked it and sat for a moment. And as I was putting the keys in the ignition, I caught sight of the stones in my rearview mirror. Something about the angle in that little rectangle of glass made my chest feel hollow. I turned the mirror up so I could not see behind me and started the car. On the drive back, I took the long way, through town, instead of the quicker route past the other cemetery on the ridge. It was a small change, just one choice. Small things stack. The next time I went up there was 3 days later. It was not a special day. I had finished folding laundry and the house felt close, and I thought fresh air would help the buzzing in my head. The sky was different that time. There was this low fog hanging under the tree line, but the road itself was clear, kind of a strip of normal cutting through a mess. I checked the time when I pulled over, 4:17 in the afternoon. Too early for it to be getting dark, but the light had that flat look it gets in November when the sun gives up early. I did not bring flowers that time, just my old thermos of coffee. I told myself I would drink it there and talk to Jill and head back before it got dim. When I opened the gate, the air on the other side felt colder. Not winter cold, just off. I took 2 steps and heard the gravel crunch under my shoes. That hard little sound that always echoes between the stones. Then, underneath it, I heard something else. A softer sound behind me. Just outside the fence, as if someone had matched my step half a beat late. I turned quick, heart jumping. No one was there. The road was empty. The trees stood still. I shrugged it off. Old ears, I told myself. Sounds bounce. I walked straight to Jill's stone, trying not to let my eyes wander, but by the time I got close, I was already angling my head to see down the slope. The Dean stone sat where it always did. The effort it took not to look at the ground in front of it felt bigger than it should have. I set the thermos down and started talking about nothing. About the neighbor's dog that would not stop barking. About the price of groceries. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket and I jumped so hard I nearly knocked the thermos over. It was just a notification from the weather app, but my nerves were already raw. I took a breath, said her name, and decided I was done. On the way back down the path, I slowed without meaning to, as I drew level with the Dean plot. The air got thicker again. I could hear a faint dripping sound somewhere, though I knew there was no water feature in that place, just ground that never quite dries. My eyes dropped to the stone. Aaron L. Dean, 1954, 2019. My brain registered that before anything else. Then, beside the stone, the shadow. Two of them. One normal, long and gray, stretching away from the stone toward the right. The other pressed in close, hunched, darker, like a patch of night someone had set down and forgotten to pick up. It was in the shape of a person kneeling, head bowed, hands on their thighs, but there was no one there to cast it. I do not know how long I stood there. My coffee went cold in my hand. I remember saying, "This is not funny," out loud. Funny to who, I do not know. The wind picked up, just a little, enough to stir the plastic flowers in a nearby vase. They rattled against each other. The regular shadow flickered a bit as the branches moved. The kneeling one did not shift at all. It stayed still, as if glued to the ground. I took one slow step closer, then another, because for all the years in the hospital, seeing people when they were at their worst, I had gathered this stubborn streak in me that hates to be pushed around by things I cannot name. I thought, maybe there is a depression in the ground. Maybe it is darker soil. Maybe something simple will show itself if I just stop behaving like a frightened child. When I got almost close enough to touch the stone, the air near my face felt thicker, warmer, even though the wind was blowing from behind me. That is when I heard it over the rattling flowers. A voice, not loud, not clear, more like breath shaping around words, right at the edge of hearing. It was coming from the ground at the base of the stone. It said my name, full, the way my sister used to say it when she wanted my attention. Linda. I froze. My first thought was that someone had come up behind me. I spun around so fast my knee twinged. No one, just rows of stones and the gate in the distance. I turned back. The second shadow was gone. Only the stone and its proper shade remained. I backed away, my heart in my throat, trying to think of any explanation that did not make me feel unmoored. Maybe it was the wind over the mouth of a little hollow, I told myself. Maybe someone on the road had called to someone else and the sound bounced. I left without visiting Jill again, walked straight out, pushed the gate, and did not look back. In the car, I set my hands on the wheel and found they were shaking so hard I could not fit the key into the ignition for a moment. I made myself start the engine and drive. I turned the radio up louder than I usually like. When I passed the other cemetery on the ridge, I stared straight ahead and gripped the wheel until my fingers hurt. You would think that would have been enough to keep me away, but habits dig in. The hospital had been my whole life. After I retired, there was a stretch of time where I did not know what to do with the hours. Visiting Jill became part of my routine. Skip it once, and you feel guilty. Skip it twice, and you feel like you are letting her die again. The third time I went up, it was early. I remember because there was frost on the grass near my trailer, and my breath showed in the air when I stepped outside. The dashboard said 8:02 when I pulled up by the gate. The sky was that hard, clear blue it gets when the cold sits heavy on the ground. The air at the cemetery felt still, almost held. When I opened the gate, it did not squeal. It moved too smoothly, as if someone had oiled the hinges. That unsettled me more than the resistance. I thought of Rick. Maybe he had finally done some maintenance. but there were no fresh tracks from his mower. I stepped in and the ground crunched under my boots. Every sound seemed sharper. I could hear crows somewhere off past the tree line, but not as many as usual. I should have gone straight to Jill. Instead, I found myself drifting to the right, down the slope, toward the Dean Stone. I told myself that if I could just see it in normal daylight, everything would line up again, and I could file the other times away as tricks of light, tricks of grief, old ears mishearing. The sun was still low, throwing long lines over the ground. When I reached the stone, its shadow fell cleanly to the side. No extra dark patch, no kneeling shape. The air felt ordinary. I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. I reached out and brushed a bit of dried moss from the top of the stone. The cold of the granite surprised me. It felt too cold, as if the sun had not touched it at all. I tucked that thought away and walked up to Jill's row, telling myself I was being dramatic again. I spent longer there that morning, maybe 40 minutes. I told her about a dream I had had where we were kids again, sitting on the back steps at our parents' house, shelling peas. In the dream, she had turned to say something and no sound had come out, and I had woken up with my heart pounding. I did not tell her that part. I just said the bit about the peas. On the way out, something small and wrong happened. It was not shadows this time. I had my phone in my hand, looking at the list of pills I needed to refill, and as I passed the Dean Stone, my eyes flicked over the carved letters without really thinking. The name read Aaron L. Dean. The dates read 1954, 2019. I took 2 more steps, then stopped. There was a pressure in my chest, the kind you get when something does not match, and your brain is slow to catch up. I turned back and looked again. The name was still there. The dates had changed. 1954, 2018. I stood there, breathing through my nose, trying not to blink too fast. I was sure, as sure as I am about anything, that the last 2 times I had read 2019. I am not the type to misplace years. In my old job, 1 wrong digit could mess up medication timing, and you learn to double-check without even thinking. I pulled my phone open and scrolled back through the little notes app, where I sometimes jot things down. I had written about the shadow after the 2nd visit, trying to make sense of it in plain words. In that note, I had written, "Man named Aaron Dean, 1954-2019. Seeing the 8 on the stone and the 9 on my screen together made my stomach lurch. Right then, as I stared, a shadow slid over the lower half of the stone, covering the changed date. I felt the air drop colder by a small measure. It was not a cloud. The sky was still clear. I felt something at my back, as if someone tall had stepped up behind me, just close enough that their presence pushed the air ahead. The smell of damp earth got stronger. I could not make myself turn around. For all the codes and policies I had followed at the hospital, for all the nights I had walked into rooms not knowing what I would find, this simple act of turning my head felt bigger. Instead, I kept my eyes on the numbers. The shadow over the stone shifted. Not with the sun, but with a kind of slow, deliberate movement. It bent at what would have been knee height if it had a body, and for a brief second, its outline darkened, forming that same kneeling shape, head bowed. The voice came again, very soft, right at the base of the stone. Linda. Only this time, it did not sound quite like Jill. The tone was off by a hair. It was as if someone had heard her say my name and was trying to copy it, but had never actually had a throat. Something in me snapped then. I spun around, a sharp, jerking motion, ready to tell whoever was messing with me to stop. There was no one. The row behind me was empty. The gate stood open, the road beyond quiet. But for a split second as I turned, at the edge of my vision, I saw a second shadow lag behind the first, as if it had been slower to move, like 2 layers trying to keep up. By the time I finished turning, there was only mine, quivering a little on the gravel because my whole body was shaking. When I looked back at the stone, the date read 2019 again. After that visit, things did not go back to normal. They did not blow up into anything dramatic either. They just tilted. Little things started to happen around the cemetery, and each one on its own could be explained. The flowers I left on Jill's grave would sometimes be moved a few inches to the left when I returned, the stems pointing a different way in the vase. You could say the wind did it. The small ceramic angel someone had left on a nearby child's grave turned to face a different direction between one visit and the next. Maybe an animal bumped it. The gate would be closed when I arrived, even on days I was sure I had seen it standing open when I turned onto the road. The gravel paths had new scuffs that did not match the tread on my shoes. Once I saw 2 sets of footprints in a low patch where the ground stayed muddy. One set was mine. The other looked narrower, but deeper. As if someone with a lot of weight on small feet had walked beside me one step behind. I tried not to talk about it. People do not want to hear about strange things in the places they expect to be dull. When I did mention a little piece of it to Rick, the groundsman, he just shrugged and said, "Shadows do funny things up here. Trees play tricks." And then changed the subject to his mower. When I told my neighbor, she said, "You've been up there too much, Linda. You need to find a hobby that is not death." Maybe she was right, but the pressure to go back did not leave. It got worse, in fact, especially at night. I would be sitting in my living room with the TV on low, not really watching, just letting the noise keep the house from feeling hollow, and my mind would drift back to that stone, the name, the dates, the way the second shadow had held itself. I would hear my sister's voice in every little creak of the trailer, in the heater coming on, saying my name in that not quite right tone. The day it broke open was not an anniversary or a holiday. It was a Tuesday, late in the year, when the ground had gone past soft, and into that point where the top is stiff with frost, and the earth underneath is still wet. I remember because I had gone to my doctor's appointment in the morning and come back with a new pill for my pressure, and it made my mouth taste like metal. I lay down in the afternoon to try to sleep off the headache it gave me, but I kept drifting in and out of dreams where I was back on the hospital floor. Only every room I walked into was empty, just beds and machines and no patients, and my footsteps echoed too loud. I woke with my heart racing and checked the clock. 2:41. The light coming through the blinds had that dull gray tone of a sky that cannot decide whether to snow. I could not shake the feeling that I needed to go up there. Not in a sentimental way, in the way you get a feeling that you left the stove on. I argued with myself out loud, told myself I could go tomorrow, that nothing up there was going anywhere. The feeling did not ease. My hands were already pulling on my boots as I talked. The drive up felt wrong from the beginning. The road looked different, though I know that sounds strange. The trees seemed closer to the pavement, their branches lower, as if they had grown overnight. The sky pressed down. When I reached the little dirt turnoff, I almost drove past it. For a second, my eyes slid right over the opening. Only when I checked the rearview mirror and saw the gap flash by did my brain catch up. I reversed too fast, tires crunching in the gravel, and turned in. The gate stood wide open, swinging a little on its hinges, though there was no wind. Something in my chest tightened. I pulled up in my usual spot, turned off the engine, and listened. No cars, no birds, no far-off chainsaw from someone cutting wood. Just a flat quiet that felt thick. I told myself I would not get out. I sat with my hands on the wheel, feeling the textured plastic under my fingers, and tried to breathe slow. Then that same voice that had whispered at the stone came, not from the ground this time, but from somewhere behind the fence, out of sight. It said my name again, clearer, closer, Linda. The sound did not go through the air the way normal voices do. It went through the steering wheel, through the seat, up my spine. I did not decide to open the door. One moment, my hand was on my lap. The next, it was on the handle, pulling. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped out. It was sharper inside the cemetery grounds. I walked to the gate. As I reached to push it further open, it stopped moving on its own, as if something on the other side had caught it. I pushed harder. It gave way with a jerk. I stepped through. The paths looked the same at first. The same gravel, the same rows, the same crooked tree to the left. But as I walked, the spacing between the stones felt off. The gaps were wrong. There was an extra marker in a row that should have had only 4. A stone that usually leaned slightly to the right stood straight. The path to Jill's row felt longer, as if someone had added a few extra feet of ground when I was not looking. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I kept walking, counting my steps, the way I used to count compressions during CPR. 26 steps from the gate to the bend. That is what it had always been. That day, I counted 32 before I reached the same bend in the path. My mouth went dry. When I reached the place where I should have turned up toward Jill's row, I saw that the little familiar tree stump I use as a marker was gone. Not cut clean, gone, as if it had never been. The ground where it should have been was unmarked. In its place stood another headstone, new, the edges still sharp, the lettering deep. My stomach twisted. I did not want to read it. I made myself. The name at the top was one I knew too well. Jillian Carver, my sister. The dates were right. The inscription at the bottom was not. It read, "She never stayed where she was put." That is something I had joked once, years ago, after she moved apartments 3 times in 1 year. I had said it in the hospital cafeteria, making my coworker laugh. Seeing it carved in stone here sent a chill all the way through me. This was not Jill's spot. Her stone was supposed to be further up, with the little chipped angel the neighbor had left. I turned my head toward where that should be, and saw only more rows of stones I did not recognize. Orchard Hill was not big. I knew its layout the way I knew the hospital floor plan. This was wrong. The cemetery had shifted around me when I was not looking. Something moved at the edge of my vision then, down the slope. My head snapped in that direction. The Dean's stone stood where it always had. The air around it looked thicker, as if I were seeing it through heat shimmer, though the cold was biting. The shadow of the stone lay in front of it, and beside that, darker and more solid, was the kneeling shape. It was clearer now, shoulders hunched, head bent low, hands on the ground. It did not look like a flat smear this time. It had a sense of depth, of weight, though it was still only dark on the grass. The part that made my chest feel tight was not the shape itself. It was the way it did not attach to anything. No body, no object casting it, just a second darkness, resting there, wrong. I took a step back without meaning to. My heel caught on something. I stumbled, caught myself on the top of the nearest stone. The cold of the granite shot up through my palm. For a second, my vision blurred. The voice came again, closer. This time, it did not just say my name. It said, "Help me up." The sound came from where the second shadow knelt. It had that same almost Jill tone, but flattened, as if the voice had been recorded and played through a cheap speaker. My throat closed. I wanted to run. My legs would not move. I stood there, my hand still on the stone, feeling my heart batter against my ribs. The second shadow shifted. It raised its head. There was no face, nothing to look at, just the deepening of the dark in that area. But I felt the focus of something turn toward me, the way you feel eyes on you in a hospital hallway before you look up and see someone at the end staring. I heard the grass move, a faint brushing sound, though the air was still. The shadow extended, an arm shape stretching along the ground, reaching in my direction. The main shadow of the stone did not change. Only the second one slid, smooth and slow, across the damp earth. I managed to move then, not fast. My limbs felt heavy, as if the air had thickened into water. I backed away one step at a time, keeping my eyes on that crawling darkness. It kept pace, not speeding up, not slowing down, just reaching. The voice kept talking, low and steady. "You always helped people. Help me. I am stuck. I am cold. I cannot get up." The words burrowed in, under my skin, because they were close to phrases I had heard my whole career. Patients in beds, asking for help, asking to be turned, to be lifted. The part that made my stomach roll was the way the voice knew that. It was using the exact tone some of them had used, the ones that stuck with me most. There was a pull in my chest, an old reflex. Nurses help. That is what we do, even when we are tired, even when our backs hurt. That reflex fought with the nausea and the terror and the sense that if I let that shadow touch my shoe, something in me would not belong to me anymore. Behind me, some of the stones had shifted again when I was not looking. I could feel it, even without turning all the way. The rows no longer lined up. The path did not point straight back to the gate. It angled off, bending between stones that I was sure had not been there before. I caught a glimpse of one name as I passed. It was mine. Not just the first and last. The middle initial, too. The dates were blank. The spot of grass in front of it was bare, as if it were waiting. My breath hitched. I forced myself to keep moving, not to stop and stare. The arm of the second shadow stretched longer, closing the distance. The air around my ankles felt colder, as if something were drawing heat out through the fabric of my pants. I started talking then, not to it, but to myself, out loud, the way I used to do during long codes when my hands worked on autopilot and my brain needed anchors. "The gate is straight ahead," I said. "Count your steps. Do not stop." My voice shook so badly, the words came out clipped. I took one step, then another. The crunch of the gravel under my boots sounded wrong, higher pitched, like bones instead of stone. I did not look down. I kept my eyes locked on the gate, which now seemed further away than it had any right to be. It was as if every time I blinked, the perspective shifted, stretching the distance. I forced myself not to blink for as long as I could, my eyes burning. The voice behind me rose in volume by a hair. Not a shout, just closer. "If you leave me here, I will follow you," it said. "It is easier if you help. You know how this works. You held hands. You watched lights go out." It was not wrong. I had done those things. It had no right to know that. Each sentence felt like fingers tapping the back of my neck. I could feel the second shadow almost at my heels now, a pressure in the ground, a dragging cold that made the small hairs on my legs stand up. Part of me wanted to turn and step forward, to let it draw level, to see what happened when it overlapped my own shape on the ground. The same way you want to look over the edge of a roof, even if you are afraid of heights. Another part of me, the older part that had watched too many people fade and knew that some lines should not be crossed, screamed inside my head to keep going. I reached the bend in the path. From there, it should have been only a few steps to the gate, except the posts did not line up where I expected. For a second, there was only fence stretching in both directions, no opening. I stumbled to a stop. Panic flared hot in my chest. The shadow behind me closed half a foot of distance in that pause. I could feel it, the way you can feel someone step up too close behind you in a checkout line. The voice dropped lower, almost a whisper against my back. "There is room," it said. "They keep room. The stone is there already. You saw it. You will fit." My throat made a small sound, more animal than word. I blinked hard, and in that blink, the gate was there again, just a few steps ahead where it always had been, the metal slightly bent. I did not question how it had vanished and reappeared. I lunged for it, my hand slamming into the cool metal so hard my knuckles stung. As soon as I put my weight against the gate, trying to shove it open wide enough to slip through, the pressure at my heels surged. It felt as if something had slammed into the ground just behind me, sending a tremor up through my legs. The cold shot higher, to my knees, to my thighs, a band tightening around me. For a second, the world narrowed to the feel of that metal under my palms and the unseen weight pressing close. The voice came one more time, right at my ear, though nothing touched my skin. "If you go, I will need someone else," it said. There was no anger in it, no threat in the tone, just flat fact. That hurt in a way I cannot explain. The idea that this thing, whatever it was, would just move on to some other person walking through. Some kid cutting across the cemetery to save time. Some husband visiting his wife's grave. That my leaving would not end it, only redirect it. For a heartbeat, I almost let go of the gate. The reflex to protect strangers, to take the hit yourself, is hard to unlearn. It is wired deep in people who work the floors. Then another voice pushed through that fog. Jill's. Not the copy, not the flattened version. A memory. Her on the phone after one of my worst shifts, saying, "You do what you can, Lynn, but you are not the wall between the world and everything bad. You are just you." The remembered tone of her voice cut cleaner than the thing behind me. I shoved the gate with everything I had. It swung open so fast, I almost fell through it. As soon as my feet hit the gravel outside, the band of cold up my legs broke. The air rushed in around me. Raw and ordinary. The sounds came back. A car in the distance, a crow calling, the faint slap of a branch in the wind. I did not run to the car. I walked because my legs were shaking too much to trust speed. I opened the door, got in, and locked it. All in one sequence I have no memory of thinking through. When I finally looked up, my rearview mirror had tilted itself back down. I do not know when that happened. The angle showed the gate and the first row of stones. For a moment, I saw nothing. Just the fence, the sign, the path. Then, on the ground just inside the gate, in the strip of dirt between the fence and the first grave, I saw two shadows where there should have been one. One was the shadow of the fence post. The other leaned against it, the shape of a person standing very still, head turned toward the road, There was no one standing there. The sight of that second dark outline made my stomach pitch. I reached up and slammed the mirror angle up again, so hard it clicked. That was months ago. I have not set foot inside Orchard Hill since. I changed the way I drive into town. I take the longer route that loops around the ridge. If I have to pass within sight of the cemetery road, I turn the radio up and focus on the lines on the pavement. I do not look toward the trees. On some nights, though, especially when the fog comes in from the river, I can feel when we are parallel, even if I cannot see the gate. There is a tightness in my chest, a prickle at the back of my neck. Sometimes, when I am sitting in my living room and the TV is off, I catch myself listening for footsteps on gravel that is not there, for the faint rattle of plastic flowers against their wire stems. Once, when I was washing dishes, I looked out the small kitchen window and for half a second saw the shape of two shadows crossing the yard instead of one. There was no one walking by. I turned away, closed my eyes, and counted slowly until my breathing eased. When I looked again, there was nothing. I still visit Jill, but only in my head now. I talk to her picture on the dresser, to the framed photo of us as kids on our bikes. I cannot force myself to walk through another gate with stones on the other side. Even driving past the big veteran cemetery out on Route 7 makes my palms sweat. I avoid the side of the street where the funeral home is when I go downtown. I cross to the opposite sidewalk without thinking. I will not step on shadows if I can help it, especially not in the late afternoon when they stretch long and double. I have taped a little piece of cardboard over the top of my rearview mirror so I cannot see behind me at night unless I tip it on purpose. I keep meaning to take it off. I do not. Sometimes I wonder about the Dean Stone, about who Aaron was. I looked through the paper archives once at the library, thinking maybe reading an obituary would make it feel more ordinary. There was no mention of him, no death notice. That in itself is not strange. Not everyone gets a write-up. But when I asked the town clerk about the plot records, she frowned and said there was no one by that name buried at Orchard Hill. I did not argue. I just nodded and left, my pulse pounding in my ears. The next day, I drove up to the cemetery road, parked far enough back that I could just see the top of the sign, and stayed in the car. I watched the line of trees, the hint of fence through the branches. I had a pair of old binoculars in the glove compartment from when my sister and I used to go look at birds. I took them out, hesitated, then lifted them. The lenses made the entrance jump close. I saw the gate, the first row of stones, and there, down the slope, the outline of the Dean Stone. It was there, as real as ever. The sun was behind a cloud, but on the ground beside it, two shadows lay. One long and gray. One darker, closer to the earth, bent. I dropped the binoculars into my lap and started the car without looking again. I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this when I was still working nights, I would have smiled, nodded, and filed it away under family stress or complicated grief. I would have checked their vitals, maybe suggested a support group. But I know what my eyes saw, and what my ears heard, and what my skin felt when that cold came up through my legs. I know that ever since that day, I have not been able to stand beside any stone, anywhere, without watching the way the shadows fall. At my cousin's funeral last month, I stayed at the very back, near the road, and kept my feet on the pavement. When the sun shifted during the service, and the shadows of the mourners stretched out past the graves, there was a moment where two of them did not match the bodies standing there. I told myself it was my nerves. I closed my eyes and waited for the minister to finish. Now I am here, in this car, at 3 a.m, parked just outside the same gate, because I woke up an hour ago with the taste of damp dirt in my mouth and the sound of my own name whispered in that wrong voice right against my ear. I got dressed in the dark, not wanting to see the look on my own face in the mirror, and drove up without turning on the radio. The road was empty. The trees loomed. The gate stood closed this time, the chain loose around it. I have not gotten out. I will not get out. The only reason I am here at all is that some stubborn, foolish part of me thought, if I come and sit and say it all out loud, maybe it will stop replaying in my head. Maybe if I put it into words, it will shrink into something that can be carried. I do not think that is happening. As I talk, as I say my name, my place, my job, as I describe the gravel and the flowers and the stone with two shadows, I can feel something on the other side of the fence paying attention, not moving yet, just listening. I know this much now. Whatever is at that Dean Stone is not a person. It is not my sister, no matter how close the voice gets. It is not comfort, not closure, not any of the pretty words they put in pamphlets at the hospital. It is a wrongness that settled into a spot between the living and the dead and started looking for an opening. Maybe it found it in me because I came too often, because I stood too long, looking at names and dates and thinking about who was where. Maybe it would have found someone else if I had stayed home that day. I will never know. What I do know is that it is still there, kneeling by that stone, waiting for someone to stand in the right place so their shadow lines up just so, and it can reach across. And I know that from now until I die, I will take the longest way around any graveyard, any churchyard, any patch of ground with markers in it. I will keep my eyes on the road and my hands on the wheel and the mirror tilted up. Because once you have seen a grave with two shadows where there should only ever be one, you cannot pretend you did not. And you learn real fast that some things do not need your help, and that the only way to stay on your own side of the ground is to keep walking away. Even when something behind you whispers your name and asks you, in a voice that almost sounds like someone you loved, to turn around and lend a hand. The child's grave that still grows, Barrow Creek, Montana. My name's Lucas Harmon. I'm from a trailer park on the edge of Billings, Montana, and I work as a roofing laborer. And I am talking into my phone right now in my car, parked by the gate to the Barrow Creek Cemetery at 3 a.m. with the engine off because the battery light came on, and I am scared to start it again. And my hands are shaking so bad, I keep hitting the wrong words. So if I mess this up, I am sorry. I just need to get it out before I lose my nerve. Because this is not a story. This is not for fun. This is what happened to me, and it is still happening in a way. And I am begging you to just listen, man. Just listen all the way before you decide I am crazy. Because I know how it sounds. I know how it sounds even while I say it. It was a Saturday. That is the first thing. It was not a spooky night or some holiday. It was just a regular Saturday that started with me being mad at my alarm clock because I had promised my boss I would help finish a roof up on the west side, even though it was supposed to be my day off. And I remember what I ate because I can still taste it when I think about that day. It was 2 slices of cold pepperoni pizza from the night before and a cup of cheap coffee I made in that little machine on my kitchen counter. The one that spits grounds into the cup sometimes. And I drank it, standing up by the sink in the same work pants I had worn the day before because they were already dirty. And I threw on a gray long sleeve shirt that has a dark smear on the front. Now that will not wash out. That smear came from that day, and I cannot get it off, no matter what I use. And I know it sounds small, but I cannot bring myself to throw the shirt away either. It just hangs on the back of my bedroom chair like it is watching me. I clocked in at the yard at 7:06, according to the little punch clock with the faded numbers. And my boss joked that I was late because he likes to say that even when you are on time. And we loaded shingles and tar and nail strips into the back of the work truck. And the whole morning was just normal. It was cold, but not snowing yet. Sky kind of white and flat. And we spent hours up there, tearing off old shingles and laying down underlayment. And my hands hurt in the usual way. Knuckles sore from the hammer. Fingertips rough from pulling on the shingle edges. And if you had asked me then what I was going to remember about that day, I would have said nothing. Just another Saturday on a roof. The Barrow Creek part only happened because of the channel. That stupid little YouTube thing I started 2 years ago, where I go around to abandoned places and film them on my phone and pretend I know what I am doing. And hardly anyone watches, but I still keep doing it. I call it Back Road Relics, like some kind of big operation. And sometimes I drag my cousin or a buddy along, but a lot of the time it is just me talking into the camera and breathing too loud because I forget to edit it out. I had read about Barrow Creek in one of those local history forums, how there used to be a little mining town out there in the hills, and then the mine closed and the town dried up, and all that is left now is some broken foundations and a cemetery on a little rise. And somebody had posted that the stones went back to the late 1800s, and I thought it would make a good video. Old graves, ghost town, all that. Good for views, right? That is all I was thinking. I swear to God, I was not trying to bother anyone resting out there. I just thought it would be cool to walk through and talk about the names and dates, and then maybe get a shot of the town ruins before the snow came in for real. I finished the roof part of the day around 2 in the afternoon. We nailed the ridge vent down and cleaned up the mess, and my boss told me I could go because he had another guy to help load up. And I remember looking at the time on my phone, 2:17, and thinking I had a good 3 hours of light left if the clouds did not thicken. So I decided to drive straight out to Barrow Creek instead of going home first, which is one of those choices that seems small when it happens, and then later You sit in the dark and think about what would have changed if you had just gone home and fallen asleep on the couch. The road out there is all two-lane and cracked and patched, with these long stretches where the trees crowd in and you lose radio signal. And I had a gas station sandwich on the passenger seat that I bought at the last stop. Turkey on white bread with too much mayonnaise. And I ate it with one hand while I drove, crumbs falling into the lap of my work pants. And I had a big bottle of soda between the seats. And everything about it felt regular, just a tired guy trying to squeeze a hobby into the end of a workday. I got off the main highway at a little sign that just said Barrow Creek in white letters that were peeling, and the road turned to gravel and then to more of a dirt track with rock showing through. And there were places where my old car bumped hard enough that I heard something in the back rattle. Probably the cheap tripod I keep back there, along with a tangle of extension cords and a coil of rope. Things I always mean to organize and never do. The sky was getting that late afternoon look by then. Not sunset yet, but the light was starting to go yellow around the edges. And the air felt colder when I rolled the window down to spit out a bit of sandwich crust I did not want. I came around a bend, and there it was. The cemetery up on a little slope to my right, fenced in with rusted metal posts and a sagging wire. And the town site down lower on the left. Just a couple of stone foundations and some scraps of wood and what might have been a cellar hole half filled with trash. But I barely looked at the town at first because my eyes went straight to the graveyard. There is a gate there, just a simple metal thing on two hinges, not locked, leaning a bit so it scrapes the ground, and beside it, a patch of dirt where people must have pulled off and parked over the years. And that is exactly where I am, right now as I talk. Same angle, same view. Except it is dark now, and the only light is my phone screen. And the faint glow from the town, way back on the highway if I twist in my seat. Back then, when I first pulled in, it was just quiet. No other cars, no footprints that I could see in the dirt lot. And the first thing I thought was that I was lucky. No one was around to think I was disrespectful walking around with a camera. I killed the engine, grabbed my backpack, checked that my little gimbal and spare battery pack were in there. And I remember I almost took the sandwich wrapper with me to toss if I saw a trash can. But then I just crumpled it and left it in the cup holder like I always do. Stupid detail, I know, but I can still see the blue and white of it out of the corner of my eye, even now. I walked up to the gate and pushed it open, and it made that metal on metal sound. Not loud, just scraping. And the air inside the fence felt colder. I noticed that right away, like stepping from shade into more shade. And the ground sloped up gently with rows of old headstones, some tilting, some broken, some just little markers that barely came past the top of my boot. The dates were what you would expect. 1870-something, 1890, 1912. Families with the same last name over and over. Little lamb carvings on some of the small stones. And I started talking to the camera like I always do, saying my name, saying the name of the channel, and then turning it around to show the graves and the hills behind them. I did not see the child's grave right away. That is important. It was not like I locked onto it the second I walked in. It was just one more stone in the layout at first. I went up and down a couple of rows, reading names out loud, pointing out the way the lettering had faded on some and stayed sharp on others. And there was this little crunch under my boots from the gravel and dead grass. And the only other sound was this soft rustling from the dry weeds along the fence. And I thought it was actually kind of peaceful, which is something I cannot make myself feel again in any cemetery now. I think the first time I noticed that grave was when I stopped filming for a second to adjust the gimbal because my hand was already tired from work and I did not want the footage to be all shaky. And I was just standing there, not talking, and my eyes were wandering across the stones, and they caught on this small mound near the middle of the cemetery, a little off to the right from where I was. And I remember thinking it looked strange, but not knowing exactly why for a second. It was not the youngest grave by date. I found that out later, but it felt new in some way, even though the stone was old, and there was nothing bright sitting on it. No fresh flowers, nothing like that. The mound itself was what caught me. Most of the other graves had settled over time, so the ground was more or less flat, but this one rose up, not dramatically, just enough that you could see it from a distance, like a long, low bump with the headstone at one end. I walked over to it without really meaning to, just kind of drawn, and when I got close, I saw the name, and I'm not going to say it out loud right now, because there is a part of me that feels like that will make something notice. But I saw the name and the dates were what put that first little stone in my stomach. Born 1909, died 1914, those were the numbers, so you do the math. A little kid, 5 years old, and the inscription under it said something about a beloved child taken too soon. The usual kind of thing. But the letters were deeper, like someone had carved them with their whole arm. And the stone itself was small and rounded. Not like the tall ones around it. There were no toys on it then, no flowers, nothing but the bare mound and some dead grass. I remember I ran my boot along the side of the mound without thinking, just to see how firm it was. And the dirt felt packed, not soft, which makes sense after all those years. And the top of the mound reached about halfway up my shin. I am telling you that because that is how I kept measuring it in my head later, by where it hit, on my leg. I filmed a little segment about the dates and the fact that a town that small had a separate cemetery, and how you could almost see the whole history of it in just a few rows, and then I moved on. Or I thought I did. The first strange thing, the first thing that did not line up, was small enough that I tried to ignore it. I walked down toward the far end where there were a few broken stones near a tree, and I realized I had left my backpack back near the middle, by the child's grave, so I turned around to go get it, and for a second I could not see it. The cemetery is not big, maybe 10 or 12 rows wide, and my backpack is bright red, so I should have seen it right away, but my eyes slid over the spot where I thought I had left it, and it was not there, and my stomach did this little drop. I took a few more steps back up the slope, and then I saw it, but it was not where I remembered. I had left it, I swear to God, just inside the gate, because I remember thinking I did not want to scatter my stuff all over, and now it was sitting right at the side of that child's mound, propped against the stone, like someone had put it there on purpose. I stood there for a long second just looking at it, hearing my own breathing in my ears, and I told myself I must have carried it up there, without thinking while I was talking into the camera, that I had moved it and not realized. And I grabbed it and slung it over my shoulder and told myself that is what had happened. That is how it always goes. You explain the first thing away because that is easier than admitting you do not remember doing something. I kept walking, kept filming, talking about the town and how the mine must have been, all that filler. And I checked the time on my phone a couple of times because I did not want to get caught out there after dark on that dirt road. It seemed like it was going fast and slow at the same time. At one point, I could have sworn only 10 minutes had passed and my phone said it had been 30, but I figured I had misread it earlier. No big deal. The air was getting colder and my fingers were starting to sting even in my work gloves, and there was this smell of damp dirt and something sharp like metal or stone dust, and I told myself it was just the ground freezing. I went back to that child's grave one more time because I had decided I wanted a close-up shot of the dates and the inscription, something I could cut to later in editing. And when I walked up the slope, my boot slipped a little on the gravel, and I remember thinking the angle felt steeper than before. When I reached the mound, the first thing I noticed was that it seemed higher. Not by a lot, not like a movie where the ground heaves up. I am not saying that. Just enough that when I stood beside it, the top of the mound was brushing just under my knee instead of halfway up my shin. And I remember freezing in place and looking down at my leg and the dirt and back again. like my brain needed a second to match the shapes. I checked the ground around it, wondering if I had walked into a lower spot before. But the slope was smooth, no sudden dips. I even took a couple of steps back and then forward again, like maybe I was remembering wrong. The mound did not move while I watched it. It just was higher than it had been in my memory, and I started to feel that tightness in my chest. I get sometimes when I am up too high on a roof and look over the edge. I filmed the close-up anyway, my voice sounding thin and a little shaky on the playback later. And I made some dumb comment about how the mound looked strange compared to the others, trying to keep it light for the imaginary viewers. Then I noticed the toy. It was just sitting there on the far side of the mound, half in the grass, a small plastic truck, the kind you would buy in a cheap pack, maybe 3 inches long, white with black wheels, nothing special. It was not there before. I am as sure of that as I am of my own name. I had walked all the way around the mound when I filmed the dates the first time, and there was nothing. I crouched down, my knees popping, and picked it up, and it was cold to the touch, like it had been out there for a while, not warm from a hand, and a little bit of dirt was stuck in the wheels. I turned around right away, scanning the rest of the cemetery, expecting to see some family I had missed. Maybe someone had come in while I was walking the other side, some parent with a kid. But there was no one, just the rows of stones and the bare trees, and the fence and the gate standing where I had left it, half open. You know that feeling when you are sure someone is behind you, even when you are alone in a room? That kind of prickling at the back of your neck. I got that then, standing there with that little truck in my hand. And I told myself again that it had probably been there the whole time, stuck in the grass so I had not seen it. Maybe left by some other visitor years ago. I set the truck back down on the mound, right on top in the center, thinking it would make a good shot if I wanted to talk about how people leave things for kids on graves. And then I backed away a few steps and filmed it like that. The little toy sitting on the bump of earth, under the old stone. The wind had picked up by then, just a little, enough to make the dry grass rustle louder. And I remember hearing this faint rattling noise and realizing it was coming from some plastic flowers on a grave 2 rows over, their stems knocking against the metal vase they were stuck in. That sound is one of the ones that sticks with me most now. Those fake petals trembling in air that did not seem strong enough to move them. I stopped filming after that because my fingers were really starting to hurt, and I decided I would walk down and get some shots of the town ruins before the light got any worse. I made it as far as the gate when I remembered my tripod in the car and figured I could set up a steady, wide shot from the lane. I turned around for one last look at the cemetery before stepping through the gate, the way you do, just to take it in. And that is when I saw the footprints. They were small, smaller than my boot by at least half, spaced close together in a messy circle around the child's mound. Not deep, just impressions in the thin layer of soft dirt and frost on the surface. And they had not been there when I was crouched right beside that grave a minute earlier. Holding the toy truck, I am telling you, they had not. There was a faint dusting of something like frozen dew on the ground, and the prints had pressed through it so the soil looked darker, in the shape of each little shoe, and there were no tracks coming to the mound or away from it. Just the circle, like someone had walked around and around in a tight path. My first thought was that I was looking at old marks that I had not noticed before, but I could see my own boot prints leading up in a way, and they looked different, edges more blurred, and they also overlapped some of the small ones, which means the small ones were newer. I did this slow turn in place, scanning the graves, my breath coming faster, and I said out loud, without meaning to, "Hello," which is the last thing I would normally say in a place like that, and my voice sounded wrong in the cold air, too loud. Nothing answered, nothing moved, just the flowers rattling and some distant bird calling once, and then shutting up. And I told myself, again, that there had to be some explanation. Maybe some kids had been up there earlier that day, and I had not noticed their tracks until the light hit them just right. That was when I heard the giggle. It was not a full laugh, not some horror movie sound effect. It was just a short, high little sound, like when a kid sees something and thinks it is funny, but is trying to be quiet about it. It came from the direction of the far fence, down near a cluster of stones under a tree, not from right beside me. And it was clear enough that my brain did not even question what it was. It just labeled it child. That is a child laughing. I whipped my head that way so fast my neck hurt, and my heart was pounding, and I called out, "Hey, who is there?" And then, "Is someone here with their parents?" Something stupid like that, because my brain was still trying to slot it into a normal shape. There was no one, just the fence and the stones and the tree and the shadows between them getting longer. I stood there with my backpack on, my phone in my hand, listening so hard I could hear my own pulse. Nothing, no leaves moving, no branches, just that frozen quiet that feels thick. I do not know how long I stood like that, but my feet started to feel numb and my nose was running a little from the cold. And I finally shook myself and decided I was just tired from the roof work and listening to my own nerves. I pulled the gate closed behind me, more out of habit than anything, heard the latch click, and walked back to the car. I did not realize until I opened the back door that my tripod was not there. I keep it wedged between the back seat and the floor, and sometimes it falls over, but it was just gone, and I stared at the empty spot like that would make it appear. I checked the trunk, I checked the front passenger side. I even leaned down and looked under the seats. Nothing. For a second, I thought I had left it at home, but I could still hear the sound it had made when the car hit a bump on the way in. I was annoyed more than anything, thinking I had dropped it somewhere on the walk-up and would have to go back and look for it. And I shut the door a little harder than I needed to and turned around toward the gate, and that is when I saw it through the fence. It was leaning against the child's headstone, the 3 legs spread a little, like someone had started to set it up and then stopped. The top part tilted at an angle exactly where a camera would go. I felt something in my chest then, not like a jump or a shock, more like a slow, cold pour, like someone had tipped a bucket of cold water into my ribs and it was soaking through. I know it sounds like nothing, a tripod moving from a car to inside a fence, but you have to understand there was no one else there. The gate had been in my sight the entire time I had been by the car, and it was closed. I had just latched it. I should have just left right then. I know that now. I should have gotten in the car and driven away, and never come back, but instead, I walked back up the slope, feeling every crunch of gravel like it was too loud, and I reached the mound and grabbed the tripod with hands that did not feel like mine. The mound was higher again. I did not notice at first because I was focused on the stupid tripod. But when I turned to leave, my boot brushed the side of the mound and I felt dirt spill over the top of my foot, and it was loose, not packed like before. I stopped and looked down, and the top of the mound was now just below my knee, maybe an inch or 2 away, and the shape of it was steeper, not a gentle rise, but more like a small hill. And I swear to God, I could see small cracks in the dirt near the top, like the soil had been pushed up from underneath and then had settled again, leaving little lines. The toy truck was gone. I felt that more than saw it at first, just a sense of something missing from the picture. And then my eyes went to the bare top of the mound where I had set it, and there was nothing there, just dirt and a bit of dead grass. I half expected to see it on the ground nearby, knocked off by the wind or an animal, but the area around was clear. I had that feeling again, the one where you are sure someone is right over your shoulder, and I turned in a slow circle, my breath in little white bursts, the tripod still in my hand. I said, "Man, this is not funny," out loud, like someone was playing a trick, but even as I said it, I knew there was no one to hear. That is when my phone buzzed in my pocket, and the sound made me jump hard enough that I almost dropped the tripod. I pulled it out with stiff fingers and saw I had a text from my cousin. Just one line asking if I wanted to grab dinner later, and the time on the screen said 4:51. That hit me almost as hard as the footprints, because the light around me looked more like late evening than late afternoon. The shadows long, the sky already dimming toward gray, and I remember thinking, no way, it cannot be that late. I had only been there an hour, maybe. My sense of time all bent. I typed back something like maybe, still out filming, and put the phone away. And as soon as I did, I heard it again. That giggle, same short little sound, but this time it was closer, not right next to me, but not all the way at the fence either, somewhere halfway. And there was a tiny patter that went with it, the sound of small feet pushing off gravel, just one or two quick steps. I froze, head up, ears straining, and in that moment, the whole cemetery felt like it was holding its breath. Every stone, every blade of grass, like the place itself was listening. I do not know how long I stood like that, but my eyes started to sting and water because I was not blinking. And finally, I snapped. I just could not stand the waiting. I said, "Where are you?" And my voice cracked on the last word in a way that made me sound young, younger than I am, and I hated that. The answer I got was not words. It was this soft scraping sound from directly under my left boot, from the mound itself, like somebody dragging their fingers along the underside of a wooden board, slow and steady, just once. I snatched my foot back off the dirt like it had burned me, and my heart went from pounding to that weird hollow thud you feel in your throat, and every hair on my body seemed to stand up at once. I could not deny anything after that, not with that sound right under me. That was the moment, the one where the world tilted and never went back. I backed away from the mound very slowly, step by step, not wanting to turn my back on it, my boots crunching on the gravel, and it felt like the headstone was watching me, even though it was just carved rock. I did not run, not yet, because some part of me still thought if I kept it slow, if I did not show fear, nothing would happen. I made it all the way to the gate like that, walking backwards, eyes locked on that bump of earth. And I reached back with one hand and fumbled for the latch without looking. For a second, I could not find it, my fingers just sliding on cold metal. And I had this mental image of the gate not being there anymore, of my hand going back and finding nothing, and realizing I was trapped inside the fence. But then my fingers closed on the bar, and I yanked it open so hard it bounced off the post. I stepped through and let it swing shut behind me, not bothering to latch it this time, and I walked fast to the car and got in and slammed the door and locked it like a lock would make any difference against whatever could make that sound under the ground. I sat there for a full minute, not moving, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the dashboard, and my breath fogged the windshield a little. When I finally turned the key, the engine caught on the second try, which is normal for my old car, but the way it stuttered before starting made my stomach flip. I put it in reverse and backed out of the dirt lot, the tires slipping a little on the loose gravel. And then I pulled forward onto the track and did not look back at the cemetery, not even once. I told myself I would. I told myself I would just take one last glance in the rear mirror once I was a little way down. But I did not. I could not, because I had this heavy feeling that if I saw that hill again, I would notice something worse. The drive back felt longer than the drive out, even though logically I know it is the same distance. The trees seemed closer, the road narrower, and the radio would not pick up any station at all, just static. So I turned it off and listened to the rattles and creaks of the car body and my own breathing. I kept glancing at the digits of the clock on the dash, and they seemed to jump in bigger steps than they should. Like I would look up and it would be 5:12. And then the next time it would be 5:38. And I would not remember that many minutes. I got back to the highway just as full dark fell all at once, not like a slow sunset. And by the time I hit the edge of Billings, the streetlights were on, and the world felt almost normal again. I met my cousin for dinner at a burger place like nothing had happened, and I kept telling myself I would not bring it up because he would laugh. But halfway through my second burger, I started talking anyway. I told him about the grave, about the mound, about the toy and the footprints and the sound under my boot, and I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it. He listened with this half smirk, like he was waiting for the punchline, and when I got to the part with the sound, he shook his head and said I was messing with him, that I probably kicked a rock and freaked myself out. When I swore up and down I was not joking, he held up his hands and said, "All right, fine. Maybe some teenagers were out there messing around, hiding, and I did not see them." I kept saying there was nowhere to hide, not that close, and he kept saying I was tired from work and overreacting. And after a while, I stopped trying to convince him because I could feel it pushing us both toward a stupid argument. He changed the subject to football, and we finished eating. And I went home and edited the footage because that is what I do. That is what keeps me from thinking too hard about anything. I just get it onto the screen and cut it up. That is when it got worse. The raw clips from the cemetery loaded fine. Nothing wrong with the file names, nothing corrupted, and I started scrubbing through, looking for the parts where I talked about the town so I could cut out my breathing and the parts where I muttered to myself. The first segments were normal enough, my voice droning on about dates and history, and I almost convinced myself again that I had overreacted, that the sound under my boot had been something simple I had misheard. Then I got to the close-up of the child's grave, the one I filmed after I first noticed the mound looked high, the one where I placed the toy truck on top. Except in the footage, I never placed the truck. It is already there at the start of the clip. I stand beside the mound, read the name and dates into the camera, and the small white truck is sitting right on top of the dirt. Dead center, wheels a little sunk into the soil. At no point in that clip do I bend down. Do I pull it from the grass? Do I set it there? I watched the clip 3 times in a row, fingers tight on the mouse, and every time it started the same way, the truck already present, like it had been there all along. I scrubbed back to the earlier wide shot of the cemetery, where I first walked up that slope, trying to see if I had missed it there, and the resolution was not great, but I could not make it out. I told myself the camera angle just did not catch it, that my memory of picking it up and feeling how cold it was had somehow slotted itself into the wrong place in the timeline. I was shaking my head at my own reflection in the dark monitor when I noticed something else. In the edges of the frame, in the spaces between the stones, there were shapes that did not look like stones at first glance, little smudges of something darker or lighter. But every time I tried to focus on one, it resolved into just the normal background, a tree trunk or a patch of grass. It was like my brain wanted to see something there and could not. I moved on to the clip I took right before leaving, the one with the footprints and the toy truck on top of the mound. Except in that file, there were no footprints around the grave, not that I could see in the low light, and the toy was at the base of the headstone, not on the mound, lying on its side in the grass. My own voice on the recording did not mention any of that. It was like watching myself from a day where nothing strange had happened, except I remembered the sound under my boot so clearly I could feel it again as I sat there at my desk, that dragging rub along the underside of something that should have been still. I checked the timestamps on the files, thinking maybe they had recorded out of order, but they lined up with what my phone had shown me at the time. Early clips around 3, later ones closer to 5. The gaps between them felt too big though, like I had not filmed as much as I thought, like there were whole minutes missing where I knew I had been standing there listening and watching. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that mound rising up inch by inch, in the dark, pushing higher, the soil cracking. I kept seeing the little toy truck too, the way it had vanished from the top of the grave, and I found myself listening for that high little giggle in the sounds of the heating system and the fridge. I told myself again and again that it had to be stress, that the roof work and the cold and the long drive had twisted my sense of things. The next morning, I almost managed to believe that. I went to work, tore shingles, nailed tar paper, joked with the guys about the game. Then, on my lunch break, I checked my channel email out of habit, and there was a message from an address I did not recognize. No profile picture, just some random letters and numbers. The subject line was Barrow Creek. I do not usually open weird emails like that, but it felt too on the nose to ignore, like it had been sent just for me, so I tapped it with my thumb. The body of the email was short, just a couple of sentences, nothing fancy. It said, "Heard you were out at the old graveyard up the hill, wondering if you saw the little grave that will not stay down. My granddad told us about it when we were kids. Said they buried a boy there who was not all there when they put him in. Parts missing from the cave-in, and every time the rest of him tries to come home, the mound swells up. Best not to walk near it after dark. No greeting, no sign-off, no name, just that." I read it 3 times, my sandwich sitting forgotten in my lap, and my fingers got cold even though I was sitting in the heated cab of the truck. I checked the time the email had come through. It was just after midnight, a few hours after I had finished editing. The sender's address was a string of numbers that did not look like any name I knew. I wrote back right away, asking who it was, how they knew I had been out there, but the message bounced back with some kind of delivery failure notice. I showed it to my cousin that night, and he said it was probably someone from the forum where I had talked about going to Barrow Creek a couple of weeks earlier when I was planning the trip, some local messing with me. That would make sense, except I had not posted the date I was going, just that I wanted to someday. I tried to let it go. I did not go back to the cemetery that week or the next. I told myself I would not use the footage after all, that it was not that interesting without something clear to show. And I left the raw files sitting in the folder on my computer. But little things started to happen that kept dragging my thoughts back there. My work boots, for example. I always leave them by the door, soles down, laces loose, ready to step into. One morning, I came out of my bedroom and found one boot tipped over on its side, the other standing upright, and there was this thin line of dirt on the floor between them, like someone had stepped out of one boot and dragged a small heel or toe across the linoleum. The line was too narrow for my foot, and the boots were dry when I had left them, no mud. I cleaned it up and made a joke about mice to myself, but my hands were shaking. A couple of days later, I came home from work and found a small toy truck sitting on my kitchen table. It was not the same one from the cemetery exactly, but it was close, same cheap plastic feel, same size, same general shape. I do not own any toys, I do not have kids, and I had not had any visitors in weeks. I picked it up with 2 fingers and turned it over and over, looking for some mark that would tell me where it had come from, but there was nothing. Just scuffed plastic. I put it in the trash, closed the lid, and went to take a shower. When I came back out, the truck was on the table again. I stood there for a full minute, just staring at it, the steam from the bathroom still trailing down the hallway behind me, and I felt like the air in the room had thickened. I did not touch it that time. I opened the back door with my elbow and swept the truck off the table with a folded dish towel, not letting my skin touch it, and flung it as hard as I could into the yard. I heard it hit something, maybe the fence, and then silence. I slept at my cousin's place that night without really telling him why, just saying the heat at my place was acting up. I could keep going with the little things. The sound of small feet running through the hallway when I was alone. The way my phone alarm would sometimes ring at 3:00 a.m. on days I had not set it. Same tone I use for filming reminders. The way the dirt by my front step sometimes had tiny depressions in it in the mornings, like somebody had stood there watching the door, small shoes pressed into the frost. None of that is why I am back here now in the car though. That part started yesterday. I came home from a long day on a flat roof, my shoulders aching, and there was an envelope tucked under my door, no stamp, just slid in the crack. Inside was a single printed photo on cheap paper, probably from a home printer. It was a shot of the Barrow Creek Cemetery from the gate, taken from about the same angle as my first video clip. And you could see the rows of stones and the hill and the tree. Whoever had printed it had circled one spot in red pen. Not perfectly, like it had been done in a hurry. The circle was around the child's grave. In the photograph, the mound was much higher than I remembered, almost thigh-high to the scale of the stones, a sharp rise instead of a gentle one. At the bottom of the photo, written in red ink, were 4 words. It keeps growing for you. I dropped the picture on the floor like it had burned me and just stood there staring at it. I checked my door, the lock, the windows. No signs of forced entry, nothing missing. Nothing moved except for the photo. I called my cousin and tried to tell him about it, but he was out with friends, his voice loud and fuzzy through the phone. And he told me again that some local must have seen my car out there and decided to mess with me. He said, "You are feeding it by reacting. Just throw that stuff away, man." I wanted to believe him so badly, but my gut was saying something else. I slept in my clothes on the couch that night with the TV on, not really watching, every sound from the hallway making me flinch. I dreamed about walking between graves and feeling something tug at the hem of my shirt from below. And I woke up at 3 a.m. on the dot with my heart racing and the taste of dirt in my mouth. The decision to come back here tonight was not really a decision. It was like something kept pressing on me all day, this weight behind my eyes. And by evening, I knew I was not going to get any peace sitting in that trailer, wondering what the mound looked like now. I grabbed my keys and my jacket and told myself I was just going to drive by, just look from the road, not even get out. On the way out of town, it started to snow, that fine, dry kind that blows sideways and barely shows up until it sticks. And the world outside the windshield turned into streaks of white lines in the headlights. The closer I got to the turnoff, the heavier that feeling in my chest got, like I was driving into a storm I could not see. I turned onto the Barrow Creek Road anyway, tires crunching on the thin layer of snow, and drove slow, low beams cutting through the dark. When I pulled up to the cemetery, the gate and the fence and everything looked the same, just dusted with snow. The town ruins down the hill were just shapes in the dark, and there were no other cars, no tracks leading in or out, but mine. I left the engine running at first and just sat there, hands on the wheel, staring through the fence. The mound was visible even from the car, a dark shape in the middle of the white, rising higher than I remembered, casting a shadow in the headlights that reached toward the tree line. I turned the engine off without really thinking, and the sudden silence pressed in. That is when the battery light flicked on for a second, before everything went dark, the dashboard, the cabin light, all of it. The engine died like someone had cut a cord. I twisted the key again, and the starter clicked once, weak, and then nothing. My heart did that hollow thud again, and for a moment, I was more scared of being stuck out here in the cold than anything else. Then I looked up through the windshield and saw the footprints. They were fresh in the thin snow, starting right at the fence and leading straight toward my car, small and close together, each one sharp around the edges. There were no prints leading back toward the cemetery, only toward me. They stopped at the driver's side door. That is where they end right now. I can see them if I lean a little, the last 2 prints pressed into the snow right beside my door, one slightly ahead of the other, like someone had taken a tiny step and then stopped, waiting. I have not opened the door yet. I locked it when the engine died, even though that is a stupid instinct in the middle of nowhere. But my hand went to the button without me telling it to. I have been sitting here for I do not know how long, talking into this phone, watching the battery level drop, listening. Every now and then, I hear a small sound from outside, from somewhere low, near the tires maybe, a soft scrape like a shoe shifting on gravel, and once I heard that high little giggle again, muffled, like it was coming through the metal of the door. I keep trying to tell myself it is the wind, or branches, or something simple, but it does not sound like any wind I have ever heard. I keep thinking about that story in the email, about the boy who was not all there when they buried him, about parts missing from the cave-in. I keep thinking about the way the mound felt under my boot, that push from below, like something trying to reach the surface. I do not know what it wants from me, if it wants anything, or if I just happen to be the one dumb enough to stand there over it, long enough for it to notice. All I know is that since that day, I cannot drive past a cemetery without feeling my hands sweat on the wheel. I change routes to avoid them, even if it adds 20 minutes. I turn the radio up loud when I cannot avoid passing one, so I do not hear anything. I should not. I will not go to funerals now, not even for family. I send flowers and make excuses, because the idea of standing by any open ground, meant for a body, makes my knees weak. I cannot look at children's headstones in pictures or movies. I have to look away. The shirt I wore that day hangs on the back of my chair, and I swear sometimes the smear on the front is higher than it was before, like something brushed by me and left a mark that is still rising. This is not a story I am going to upload for fun, even though I started talking like that out of habit. This is me trying to leave something behind in case someone finds this phone and wonders why the car is sitting by the gate with the battery dead and the snow covering everything. Listen, I am telling you, if you ever hear about Barrow Creek, if someone ever asks you to go see the old cemetery up on the hill, do not go near that child's grave. Do not step on that mound. Do not leave anything on it. Not flowers, not toys, nothing. If you already did, if you are hearing this and remembering the feel of dirt under your shoes, I do not know what to tell you, except that I think once it knows the shape of your weight, it does not forget. Wait, I forgot to tell you something. This part keeps coming back to me like a splinter. When I was parked here earlier, before I started recording, before the engine died, I got one notification on my phone, just one, even though the signal is bad out here. It was from my own channel. Someone had left a comment on a video I never uploaded, a Barrow Creek video that does not exist in my list. The comment just said, "Come back, I am not finished," and the username was the same string of numbers as that email. I tried to tap it to open the video, and the app just froze and then closed. I do not know what that means. I do not know how any of that works. I just know that when I looked up after that, the mound in the headlights looked higher again, like it had inched up, while my eyes were on the screen. I am so tired, man. I feel like I have not slept since that first day. My thoughts going in circles like those little footprints, and I do not know how to get out of this. I am going to try the engine again in a minute when I get the nerve, even though I am scared of what I will see in the mirrors if it does start, scared of what I will hear if it does not. If I get out and walk around to check under the hood, my feet will have to step where those small prints end. I do not want to feel the ground there. I do not want to know if it is firm or if it gives a little, like something has been standing there too long. If you are listening to this and you are somewhere safe, in a house or an apartment, or anywhere that is not within sight of a cemetery fence, you might not understand how heavy the air can feel when the dead are this close and something under a child's stone is still trying to rise. I am telling you the plain truth with no fancy words. No big lesson at the end. I went out to film an old graveyard for a channel nobody watches, and I walked where I should not have. And now I am sitting in the dark by that same gate, watching the snow fill in those little footprints one by one. And I know that underneath that white, there is a mound that will keep growing until something stops it, or until it reaches what it is trying to get to. I am not going to walk past cemeteries anymore. Not ever. I am going to add 20 miles to every trip if I have to. I am going to move if I have to, so I do not even have to drive by the one on the edge of town. I cannot prove any of this. I cannot show you a clear photo or a clip that will convince you. All I have are these shaking words and the sound right now of something faint and soft against the metal of my door, like small fingers testing the gap, and the knowledge that I am never going to be the kind of person who can look at a grave and only see stone and dates again. My name's Tyler Grayson. I'm from a little place outside Silver Draw, Arizona, and I work as a field tech on a geological survey crew. The kind of job where you haul gear up bad roads, swing a hammer into hard ground, and go home with dust in your teeth. And right now, it is a little after 3 in the morning, and I am parked by the fence line at Dead Horse Ridge Cemetery with the engine off so the battery does not die on me again. And my hands are shaking so much I can barely keep them still on the steering wheel. So I'm just going to talk and hope that getting this out of my head makes it quieter for a while. I remember exactly what I ate the morning this started, which feels stupid to say, but that is how it is stuck in my mind. Like the details were nailed down so nothing else would slip away. I had 2 gas station breakfast burritos that were still half frozen in the middle, and a coffee that tasted like burned cardboard because they never changed the filter right. And I was wearing this faded long-sleeve blue work shirt with a rust-colored stain on the left cuff from when I pinched my wrist on a drill stand a month back. And I looked at that stain in the mirror before I left and told myself again that I really needed to get a new shirt. But I did not, because money is tight and shirts can wait. And I threw my hard hat in the back of the truck and told my mom I would be home late because we were running a line out past the ridge. We had been working that area for a couple of weeks already, running seismic lines, dropping little charges, listening for how the rock answered back, trying to build a picture of the faults under the town. Nothing fancy, just a contract the company got with the county. But anytime you said Dead Horse Ridge, around the older guys, they would do that little half smile and say good luck, like it was a joke they were too tired to explain. And I just thought it was one more story people tell to make boring work sound interesting. I checked my phone right before I pulled out of the driveway. It said 7:18 a.m., and I remember thinking I had just enough time to top off the gas without being the last one at the yard, and that if I was late again, my supervisor, Mark, was going to give me that disappointed look that feels worse than getting yelled at. The sky was still pale and empty. You know, that washed out color it gets before the sun really decides on a shade of blue. And all I was thinking about was whether the cooler in the back still had ice in it from yesterday, and if I had left my gloves in the storage container again. Nothing about it felt strange then. It did not start strange. That is what I am trying to say. We rolled out from the yard in 2 trucks, the white one with the busted tail light that never gets fixed, and the older tan one that smells like old sweat and spilled diesel. I was riding with Ray. He is one of those guys who has been doing this longer than I have been alive. Hands like leather, quiet most of the time. And he had the radio on some old country station, so low you could barely hear it over the road noise. He said, "You bring the new geophone strings." And I said, "Yeah, they are in the back." I double-checked, and he nodded and said, "Good, we will need them on the upper slope." And then after a mile or 2, he added, "You ever been up on that ridge before, man?" Like he had just remembered to ask. I told him I had driven past, because everyone around here drives past sooner or later. You see that cemetery up on the side of the hill, like somebody glued it there. The headstones all at weird angles, because the ground keeps sliding. And at night, the solar lights people put on the graves look like a broken set of Christmas lights hanging in the air. But I had never actually gone inside, and he just said, "You will today." And then he changed the station and did not say much else. We parked below the ridge where the dirt road splits, one way up toward the old mining road that nobody uses anymore, and one way toward the maintenance gate for the cemetery, the chain link fence, the metal sign with the paint peeling that says Dead Horse Ridge Memorial. And I remember I checked the time again when I stepped out of the truck, 8:02 a.m. The sun was up and already hot, and the smell out there was dust and dry weeds, and something faintly sweet from fake flowers that had faded to a weird pink. The cemetery sits on the side of the hill looking down toward town, like it is watching the highway and the little square buildings. And the first thing I noticed, even before we went through the side gate, was how crooked everything looked. Not just a little bit, but like the whole place was tilting. Rows that should have been straight were bent, and the ground between the stones dipped and rose in ways that made your boots slide. Mark pointed toward the top edge and said, "We need the line up there, close as we can get to the rock face without putting gear on the graves. We have a permit for the access road, but not for the actual burial plots. So do not step where you do not have to." And then he handed me a bundle of stakes and told me to start laying them every 10 meters, while the others unloaded the rest of the equipment. I was not thinking about anything except getting it done, my shoulders already feeling the weight of the bundles, the wood rubbing against the shirt that already had that old stain. And I walked along the fence and through the open side gate and into the cemetery, boots hitting gravel that crunched louder than it should have, every step a little echo in the quiet. Inside, it did not feel like the cemeteries I remembered from when my grandparents passed, with the green grass and the neat marble stones. This one had patches of brittle grass like straw, plastic flowers stuck into dry vases, crooked metal holders with flags stiff with dust. Some of the older stones were so worn you could not read the names anymore, just dips where letters used to be, and the newer headstones looked almost too clean in comparison, like they were not sure they belonged yet. I counted out 10 long steps from the fence line along the upper edge, planted the first stake, and that is when I saw it, the stone that everything keeps circling back to in my head. It was not special at first glance, just a gray headstone set a little closer to the drop-off where the ridge cut down toward the old mining camps, tall enough to notice, not fancy. No angels, no carved roses, no big statue, just a slab with a name and dates. But the thing that snagged my attention first was how it leaned, not the way the others did, sinking downhill, but leaning just slightly uphill, like it was resisting the slide of the ground, fighting it. The name on it was Jacob Ruiz, the letters cut deep enough to still be clear, and underneath it said, "Beloved husband and father," and the dates were 1873 to 1911. And there was a short line under that, "We heard you, we answered." I remember mouthing that to myself, "We heard you, we answered," and feeling a little twist in my stomach for no reason I could name yet. I thought maybe it was some kind of prayer line, something from a hymn I did not recognize, and I made a mental note to ask my mom later. She knows those kinds of things, but then Ray called my name from below, and I moved on. The first wrong thing. The first thing that did not fit. I did not even notice it as wrong in the moment. That came later when everything else started stacking up, like you only see the pattern after the last piece drops. We worked that whole morning without anything crazy happening. I laid out stakes and uncoiled cable. The others set up the control unit down by the trucks. Mark walked the line checking spacing. The sun got harsher. The air shimmered over the headstones, and now and then I would pass that Jacob Ruiz grave and feel my eyes pulled to it like a magnet. Read those dates again, read that line again, and keep going. At one point near midday, I sat on the concrete edge of another grave, a few rows down to drink some water, and I realized I could feel a faint vibration under me, like a truck engine far away, a low hum, and I turned around expecting to see one of the trucks backing up or somebody running the small generator, but everything down by the road was still. No engines on, no blades spinning. The only movement was the little shimmer of heat and a bit of plastic flower ribbon fluttering in a faint wind. I put my hand on the ground beside me, pressed my palm flat, and the feeling was there. A tiny, steady buzzing, not like footsteps or distant blasting, just a constant little tremor. I told myself it was something to do with the rock under the hill, some resonance thing we were here to measure anyway, and I got up and went back to work. When we fired the first test charges mid-afternoon is when the sound started to get into my head. I was at the top of the line, near that leaning headstone, checking that the last set of geophones were straight and the cables were not kinked, when Mark called over the radio that they were about to trigger, and I knelt up there with my hand on the nearest stake because sometimes you can feel the little thump if the ground is right, and I did feel it, a dull bump like somebody slamming a door downstairs, but mixed in with it. Just for a second, I heard something else. It sounded like somebody shouting under a blanket. The kind of muffled sound you get when a neighbor yells through a wall. Not words, just a strained human noise, and it came from right behind me. I spun around fast enough that I almost tripped over the cables. There was nobody there. Just the row of stones and the drop toward the scrubby slope. My heart hit hard against my ribs, and I laughed once. A little short laugh that did not feel right, and I said out loud, "You are tired, man. Calm down." And I called down on the radio that the top end looked good. It bothered me enough that at the next blast, I was ready. I told myself I was going to prove it was my imagination, that it was some echo from the shot bouncing off the ridge wall. So when Mark said ready again, I turned my head, looked straight at the row where the sound had seemed to come from, and I saw it. I saw the Ruiz headstone tremble. Not the way things shake when the ground does. Not a little dust bouncing, but the whole slab shivering like a phone on a table. Like something inside it was pushing against the stone from the back. It rattled against its base, just the slightest clack, and the air around it seemed to buzz, and under the thump of the shot, there it was again. That muffled, stretched sound of somebody shouting with their mouth full. I do not know how long I stood there watching it. Maybe 3 seconds, maybe 10. But by the time my brain caught up and told my feet to move, the vibration was gone. The headstone was still, and all that was left was the ringing in my ears and the dry taste in my mouth. I walked down to the trucks slower than I meant to when they called us in to check the first recordings. Mark was bent over the laptop in the back of the tan truck, scrolling through the waveforms. And he pointed at one little string of spikes and said, "See that? That is the reflection we were hoping for. Good, clean data." And I nodded like I understood. But I was not really looking at the screen. I was listening, trying to figure out if anybody else had heard what I heard. Finally, I asked, "Hey, did you feel anything weird on that last one? Like more vibration up top?" And Ray shrugged and said, "Hill shakes a little. That is what we are here for." And I said, "No, I mean, did you hear anything? Like a voice?" And he stopped what he was doing and glanced up at me, and there was something like a flicker in his eyes before he pushed it down and said, "Sound reflections get strange sometimes." And then he changed the subject so fast, it was like I had not spoken, told Mark the generator was sounding rough, and he was going to check the filter. That flicker stuck with me all afternoon. We ran more lines, moved some units. The hours stretched in that way they do when the heat wears you out, and nobody mentioned anything else odd. But each time a shot went off, I found myself watching that one stone, and more than once I saw it quiver, just a little, not enough that you would notice if you were not staring. But I was, and every time I could almost make out something in the noise, like a syllable you can almost catch in another room. The day should have ended like any other. Pack up, drive back, complain about the dust and the pay. But right before we started loading gear, Mark realized one of the data loggers was missing. It should have been at the top of the line, up near the Ruiz grave. And I swore I had seen it when we did the last check, but when we walked the line, stepping carefully between stones, it was not there. We checked the truck beds, the cases, everywhere obvious, and nothing. Mark was not angry, but he was tight, like his jaw set in that way. Because those units are expensive and the company charges if you lose one. And he finally said, "All right, we have to go. We are losing light. We will look again tomorrow. Maybe somebody moved it and forgot." I stopped him and said, "I will run back up and check one more time. It will only take 5 minutes. I do not want to pay for that thing if it turns up under a bush." And he looked at the sky, weighed the light, and said, "Fine." "Leave your phone so I know you do not just sit up there." And he laughed a little, but it did not quite reach his eyes. The others started packing the heavy cases into the trucks, engines turning over, doors slamming, and I jogged back up the slope alone, the air cooling just enough that the sweat on my neck felt clammy. The cemetery was quieter with everybody gone, not just quiet like no one talking, but quiet like a room after a fight, a stillness that feels loaded. The plastic flowers did not move anymore. The flag near the gate hung limp, and the sky over the ridge was sliding from yellow to that first grayish blue you get before the stars. I walked straight to the top of the line, boots crunching on gravel, eyes scanning for that missing logger, and when I got to the spot where it should have been, I stopped dead, because there it was, sitting neat as anything on the flat top of the Jacob Ruiz headstone. The cable was coiled around the base, like somebody had wrapped it carefully there, and the unit itself was propped up just enough that the little display screen, dark now, was facing the slope like a tiny blank face. I did not put it there. I knew I did not put it there. We do not put anything on grave markers. Mark is strict about that, and I would remember, but there it was. And my first thought, my normal thought, was that one of the guys was messing with me. Maybe Ray, maybe one of the younger techs, trying to spook the newish guy. But when I looked back down the hill toward the trucks, they were too far away. The sound of engines too steady, nobody watching me that I could see. I said, "Not funny, man," out loud, because that is what you say when you want whoever is doing something to show themselves. And the only answer was my own voice coming back weak from the slope. I stepped up to the headstone, closer than I had been all day, close enough to see the grain in the stone, the tiny chips at the edges of the letters, and I reached out to grab the logger, and the second my fingers touched the stone, the vibration hit like a live wire. It went straight up through my hand, into my arm, into my chest, not pain. Not exactly, but a buzzing, a deep shudder that made my teeth ache, and along with it, clear this time, not muffled by explosions or distance, came the sound of a man screaming inside my head. It was not in my ears, not in the air around me. It was like somebody had pressed headphones against my bones. A long, drawn-out howl that had words buried in it. I swear to you, there were words in there. I just could not pull them out. I jerked my hand back like I had grabbed a hot pipe and stumbled. The logger tumbling down into the grass beside the grave, and the sound cut off so sharp my stomach lurched. I stood there breathing hard, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. And I realized I was saying no, no, no under my breath like a kid. I forced myself to crouch, grab the logger without touching the stone again, coil the cable. And when I straightened up, I looked at the inscription one more time, like I could not stop myself. The dates were the same, 1873 to 1911. The name was the same, but the line at the bottom, the one that had bothered me all day, had changed. I did not realize it at first because my brain tried to make it say what I remembered. But the letters were different now. The carved groves clear, not a trick of light. It said, "You heard me, you left." I felt something inside me go cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air temperature. I staggered back, half sliding down the uneven ground, almost tripping over another stone, and I did not look back again until I was through the gate. Down by the trucks, everything looked normal. Guys securing straps. Mark closing the tailgate, Ray checking a tie down. I must have had something on my face because Mark frowned and said, "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." Then he kind of snorted like he regretted his own choice of words. I held up the logger and said, "Found it. Must have missed it earlier." And my voice sounded wrong even to me, thin and shaky. Ray glanced at me, eyes narrowing just a little, and said, "Where was it?" And I lied without even meaning to. I said, "Under a bush by the fence." And he just nodded, but I caught that flicker again, that tiny change in his expression, like this was something he had expected and hoped not to see. I told myself all the way back down the road that I was overtired, that the blast vibrations and the heat had gotten to me, that I had misread the inscription earlier and only noticed it properly now, that there had to be some simple thing I was missing. By the time I got home, the sun down and the house lights on, I had almost convinced myself. I ate leftover pasta without tasting it, showered off the dust, and when I lay down in bed, I told myself I was not going to think about it, that whatever it was, it would seem smaller in the morning. Instead, every time I closed my eyes, I felt that buzz in my hand again and heard that scream, buried in stone, stretched thin and trapped. I do not know when I finally slept, but when my alarm went off at 5:45 a.m., I woke up with a start, heart already racing, and for a second, I could not remember why, until the image of that changed inscription snapped into place like a door slamming shut. I almost called in sick. I had the phone in my hand, thumb hovering over Mark's name, and then I thought about the paycheck, about how we were close to the end of the contract and hours might be cut soon, about my mom's medical bills sitting on the kitchen table, and I shoved that memory down as far as it would go and went in anyway. At the yard, Ray was already there, leaning against the tan truck with a coffee in his hand, and he watched me a little too closely when I pulled up. He said, "You sleep okay?" And I said, "Yeah, fine. Why?" And he shrugged and looked away like it did not matter. On the drive out, he did not turn the radio on, and after a few minutes he said, "You know they used to bury miners up on that ridge right where we are working, before there was a proper town cemetery down below." And I said, "I figured, with the stones and all." And he said, "No, I mean the ones they did not bring back to town. The ones they put in the ground fast because the company did not want questions." I asked what he meant and he shook his head, said, "Just stories, forget it." And we rode the rest of the way in silence. The second day, the air felt heavier before we even started. Clouds were pushing in from the west, thin but enough to take the hard edge off the sun, and the wind had that weird charged feel, not quite a storm, but like one was thinking about forming. We set a second line, this one even closer to the edge of the drop, almost at the limit of where the ground was stable, and I could not avoid going near the Ruiz stone. I tried not to look at it. I really tried, but every time I walked past, my eyes slid over, drawn to those letters, and I swear to you, they were back to the original phrase again. "We heard you," we answered. The words were there, carved deep, and if there were marks of any change, they were hidden. I thought I was going to be sick. I stood there, pretending to fuss with a cable while my stomach clenched, and I told myself that yesterday, in the half-light, I must have misread it, that my brain had played a trick, that I had imagined the second line, but it did not matter how many times I repeated it. The memory of the other phrase was as solid as the stone in front of me. That day, the shots did not just make the headstone quiver, they made it sing. I do not know how else to put it. Each time the charge went off and the little ripple rolled through the hill, I could feel the vibration in my feet and in my teeth, and from the direction of that grave came this high, thin sound, just at the edge of hearing, not like the scream from when I had touched it, but like the echo of that, stretched out and distant. At one point, when Mark was busy down below and the others were dealing with a cable snag, I was up there alone, checking the top end, and I heard it even without a shot, a soft, steady moan, like air forced through a narrow crack. I walked toward it without meaning to, like someone pulling on a string tied around my chest. And when I got within a few feet, the sound swelled, and I realized it was not coming from around the stone, but from inside it. I stepped back, heart pounding, and that was when I noticed something else had changed. At the base of the headstone, where earth met concrete, the dirt was pushed up in a neat little ring, like you see around a gopher hole, a narrow raised ridge of loose soil all the way around the stone, as if something underneath had been pushing upward, pressing against the bottom of the marker. It was not like that yesterday. I would have seen it. I crouched down and touched the disturbed dirt with the back of my fingers, half expecting that deep vibration to punch up again. But there was nothing, just dry, crumbly soil. Still, the pattern of it made my skin crawl. It looked almost like something had been trying to claw its way up and had only managed to shift the dirt a little, not enough to break through. That afternoon, I asked Ray straight out what he knew about the place. We were at the trucks, while Mark went into town to pick up a replacement fuse. Just the two of us, the wind pushing little eddies of dust along the ground. I said, "Listen, man, I need you to tell me what you meant about the miners they buried up here." And he stared at the ridge for a long moment before he answered. He said, "My granddad worked those shafts before they closed. He was a young man then, and he told me once after his second stroke, when he did not care who heard him anymore, that there was a collapse one year, wintertime, heavy rain, bad supports, and a whole crew got caught. They managed to pull a few out alive. Most were gone when they reached them. But there was one man, a loader, who was trapped in a pocket with his legs pinned. They got to him. They heard him shouting for help, begging. And the foreman took one look at the shaft and told them to seal it anyway. Said the rock was too unstable. Anybody who stayed would be joining him. And the company would not pay out on men who had no families. My granddad argued. A few of the others did too. But the foreman ordered them out and had the mouth boarded, then ordered a fill. The man inside did not stop yelling while they did it. My granddad said he could hear him under the sound of the rocks. He drank hard after that, never went back to that shaft. They put a marker up later to keep the men quiet, make it look like they had brought the body back. Ray did not say the name, but I knew. I knew. I said, "Was his name Jacob?" And Ray finally looked at me, really looked, and said, "You saw his stone then." I told him about the vibration when I touched it, about the scream in my bones, about the inscription changing, the way it had said, "You heard me, you left." And as I said it out loud, I felt stupid and scared at the same time, like I was handing someone my worst dream and asking them to tell me if it was real. Ray listened without interrupting, jaw working. And when I finished, he did not laugh or tell me I was imagining things. He just said, "My granddad used to say he could still hear that man some nights when the wind was right, like the rock was holding on to his voice." And then he added, "We should finish up here fast." The third day is when everything broke for me. By then, I had not really slept in 2 nights. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the headstone shaking, felt that buzzing in my hand, heard that drawn-out scream. And sometimes, just as I was about to drift off, I would hear words in it, half-formed, like "do not," and "still here," and "please," and I would jerk awake, heart pounding, sweating through the sheets. I think I was already frayed when we drove back up the ridge that morning. The sky was overcast now, properly gray, and the air had that metallic taste. It gets before a storm, but the forecast was still saying no real rain until later, so Mark was pushing to get the last line done, the one that ran almost parallel to the cemetery fence. He kept saying, "We finished today. We do not have to come back up here." And he said it like a promise to himself as much as to us. We spread out, setting stakes, moving gear, the usual, but I could not keep my eyes from going to that one grave over and over. The little ring of disturbed earth at the base of the stone was bigger now. The loose soil puffed up higher in a few spots, like something underneath was pressing harder. No one else said a word about it. By midday, I was so on edge that every little sound made me jump. A bird taking off from a scrub tree, a metal tag on a wreath clinking against a holder, the crackle of a plastic bouquet shifting. They all sounded too loud in the charged air. When the first thunder rolled somewhere off in the distance, low and far, Mark swore under his breath, in that way he has, that is not actual cussing, just frustration, and said we would run one more test shot and then start breaking down early if it moved closer. I was at the far end of the line for that one, just inside the cemetery, standing between two stones, the Ruiz marker a few yards downslope. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up from the static in the air, and my mouth was dry no matter how much water I drank. Mark called over the radio, "Ready," and I said, "Top end ready," voice thin, and there was a beat of silence, the kind that stretches, and then the world gave a little lurch as the charge went off. The ground jumped under my boots. The usual thump rolled through, but on top of it, louder than ever, came that scream, not inside my head this time, but in the air, all around, a raw, ripped sound that made my knees buckle. I clapped my hands to my ears, but it did not matter. It went straight through them, and with it came a rush of words, shredded by time, but still clear enough to make my stomach drop. "Help me. Still here. Do not leave me. Please." It was like a recording looping, but wrong, because there were little changes in the cadence, little cracks in the voice, like whoever was saying it had been saying those same words for so long they were worn thin. I dropped to one knee, breath ripped out of my chest, and I saw, through the blur of tears I did not even realize were there, the Ruiz headstone shaking so hard it looked like it might break free of its base. The little ridge of soil at the bottom was crumbling outward, dust spilling, and the whole slab was tilting, inch by inch, toward me. I do not know how long that lasted. It could not have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like being held underwater. When the sound cut off, it did not fade. It just stopped, like a switch thrown, and the sudden silence slammed into my ears so hard they rang. The headstone snapped back upright with a violent jerk that sent a puff of dust into the air, and for a moment, the carved letters seemed to blur. I staggered to my feet, everything spinning, and I realized I was not alone up there anymore. There were shapes between the rows. I saw them in the corner of my eye first, dark figures standing still in the spaces between the stones, and when I turned my head, they were gone. Like the act of looking made them flatten into shadows again, but I knew they were there. I could feel them, that weight of attention, that pressure on the back of your neck when someone is staring at you from behind. My vision tunneled, narrowing until the only clear thing was the Ruiz grave. The inscription was wrong again. I know how this sounds, but I promise you, I am not mixing this up. The name was the same, the dates the same, but the line beneath had shifted once more. This time, in letters that looked freshly cut, sharp-edged, it said, "You came back. Do not go." I must have made some kind of noise, because I heard Ray shouting my name from downslope, faint and strained, and that broke whatever hold the stone had on me. I turned and ran, stumbling between the graves, catching my boot on a marker and nearly falling. Hands scraping on rough stone as I caught myself. All the while, behind me, I could hear that faint buzzing, like the stone was still shaking, like something inside it was pushing and pushing. By the time I reached the fence, my chest hurt, and my vision had little black spots creeping in at the edges. I gripped the chain link so hard the metal bit into my palms, sucking in dry breaths, and Ray grabbed my shoulder from the outside and said, "Easy, easy, man, breathe," and I flinched so hard I almost hit him. Mark trotted up a moment later, annoyed at first, saying, "What happened? Did you trip over your own feet?" But his face changed when he saw mine. He said, "You are white as a sheet," and he is not the kind of guy who says things like that for effect. I tried to explain, but the words would not come out right. I said something about the stone, about the sound, about the inscription changing, and I could see on his face that he did not want to hear it. Not that he did not believe me, exactly, but that he wanted this to be one of those things you do not acknowledge, so it does not become real. Finally, he said, "All right, we are done for today. Weather is moving in anyway. Pack it up," and he said it in a tone that shut down any argument. On the way down, as we loaded the trucks, I noticed something that still makes my stomach clench when I think about it. The missing data logger we had found on the grave the day before. The one I had picked up and sworn to myself I would never set near a headstone again. It was back in its case where I had put it. But the cable attached to it had a fine gray dust on it, the same color as the weathered stone. And there were tiny scratches along the plastic, like it had been pulled through a rough crack. I did not tell anyone. I could not. That night, I did not even try to sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the light on, hands clasped so tight they shook, listening to every little noise in the house. At some point, maybe around 1 in the morning, I realized the faint vibration I thought I felt in the floor was not the fridge cycling, not traffic on the highway. It was the same low buzz I had felt through the stone, carried along the rock that runs under the whole town. I could hear something under it too, a murmur too low to make out, like a voice at the bottom of a well. I got in my truck and drove without really deciding to, all the way out past the last streetlights, up the familiar turns to the base of the ridge. And that is how I ended up where I am right now, parked by the main gate with the engine off, phone in my hand, talking into the dark. I told myself I was only coming out here to prove that there was nothing more to it. That in the middle of the night, with no work, no shots, no gear, the cemetery would just be a quiet place for the dead like it is supposed to be. But the second I turned off the engine and the headlight beams died against the fence, I felt it, that hum, stronger than ever, thrumming under my boots as soon as I stepped out. There are no lights up there now. The little solar lamps people leave on the graves have mostly gone out. Maybe the batteries are low, and the ridge is just a dark shape against a slightly less dark sky. The town lights below look far away, like another world. The gate is locked at night. They put a heavy chain through it after some kids spray-painted a couple of stones last year. But standing here, I do not need to go in to know that the Ruiz stone is not where it was. I can feel it, closer than it should be, like it has inched downhill with every tremor, every shot, every remembered scream, dragged slowly toward whatever voice might answer it. I keep hearing little sounds behind the fence, gravel crunching softly, like someone walking between the rows. But whenever I shine my flashlight through the chain link, there is nothing there, just the uneven shapes of stones and a few faded flower arrangements. A couple of times now, as I have been talking, I have heard my own words come back at me, not as an echo, but repeated, slightly off, like another voice trying to match the rhythm. I will say, I am telling you. And a second or two later, from up the hill, there will be a faint, I am telling you, stretched and cracked. The last time it happened, I called out, without thinking, I am sorry, we cannot help you. And the answer that came back rode the hum in the ground like a current. You heard. The words were broken up like that, each one squeezed through rock, and for a second, I felt something tug at me, like a rope around my chest. I grabbed the fence with both hands and leaned my head against the cool metal, eyes closed, and I saw, as clear as if I were standing there, men in old work clothes, faces smeared with dust, standing in a rough semicircle around a fresh boarded shaft, listening to a voice from below. Some of them had their heads bowed, some had their hands over their ears, and one man, one with a mustache and lines around his eyes, was turned away, walking back toward town with his shoulders hunched. I knew somehow, in that strange way you just know in dreams, that he was the one who had lived long enough to tell Ray's granddad, that he was the reason anyone remembered any of it. The scene flickered, shifted, and I was back in my truck, knuckles white on the steering wheel. I do not know what this thing wants from me, beyond what it has already taken. I did not seal that shaft. I was not even born when they filled it. I am just some guy with a callus on his thumb from wrapping cable and a rust stain on his shirt cuff from a drill stand. But I keep thinking about that line on the stone, The one I saw. The one no one else will believe was ever there. You heard me. You left. That is what it keeps coming back to. Not the men who sealed him in, but the ones who heard and went away. I heard. I went away. Twice now. 3 times if you count tonight. Every time I get close, the air fills with that buzzing and those words press into my bones. And every time I step back, get in my truck, drive down the hill, act like the world is still the same. I am not going back up there. I am not. I am not going to climb that fence and walk between those stones and put my hand on that marker again. I know what would happen if I did. I would feel that vibration, hear that screaming turn to words, and somewhere under it all, I would hear my own voice joining in, not from my mouth, but from the rock. Maybe that is what happened to Ray's granddad, why he could not stop hearing it. Maybe that is why the older guys at the yard do that half smile when you say Dead Horse Ridge and say good luck, like they are not sure if you will come back with all of yourself. I am telling you this because I need it to exist somewhere outside my head. I need someone, anyone, to know that there is a grave up on that hillside that does not hold a body so much as it holds a sound, a man stretched into noise by time and pressure and endless repetition. If you ever find yourself near a little desert town with a cemetery clinging to the side of a ridge, and you hear a low vibration in the soles of your boots as you walk past, do not go in. Do not stop by the fence like I am doing right now. Do not listen too hard when the wind shifts, because once you hear him, really hear him, it is like something hooks into you. You drive past another cemetery miles away, and the radio cuts out for a second, and in that static, you think you hear the start of that same voice. Help me, still here, do not leave me. And you turn the volume up, change the station, anything to drown it, but it is already under your skin. I do not walk past cemeteries anymore if I can help it. If I see headstones from the road, I change lanes. I look away. My hands clamp on the wheel. I do not go to funerals now, not even when I should. I sent flowers when my cousin's father passed and made up a story about a job out of town because the thought of standing by an open grave, listening for any sound at the edge of hearing, made my vision blur. I crossed the street to avoid the little memorial plots by churches. I do not let my mom put flowers on my grandparents' graves anymore. I just say I am too busy, it is too hard, some excuse, because the last time I tried, I heard the tiniest scratching under the grass that no one else seemed to notice. I am sitting here, in the dark, with my truck's dome light off, and my phone screen the only glow, and the hum under my feet is getting stronger. I can feel it through the frame of the truck now, a steady thrum, like a hand knocking from below. The fence rattled a minute ago, just once, a sharp shake like something heavy brushed against it, and I flinched so hard my neck hurts. I know I should turn the key, start the engine, drive away, and never come back. Maybe even move to a place where the ground is solid and flat, and there are no old mining shafts under the houses. But my hand will not quite close on the keys. It is like that buzzing is running through the metal into my bones, making my muscles slow. There was a moment, just now, when the hum rose and I heard a new set of words pressed into it, the voice closer than it has ever been. You came back. Do not go. I am not special. I am not brave. I am just tired and scared and talking into a cracked phone screen because I do not know what else to do. If you hear that line somewhere, if you ever see a headstone with words that do not make sense, look away. Keep walking. Do not answer. Because once you do, once you stand there and listen and then turn your back, you are part of the story that stone tells, and it does not forget. I do not know if I am going to be able to leave this time. I am going to try. I am going to put the phone down on the seat, take the keys, and turn them like it is just another day finishing another job. If I make it back to town, if I spend the rest of my life avoiding every cemetery, every graveyard, every little cluster of stones by the side of the road. Maybe the hum will fade. Maybe the voice will sink back into the rock. Or maybe one night, years from now, I will be driving some other lonely road and feel that vibration under the tires. Hear someone in the back seat whisper, "We heard you, we answered." And realize I never really left that hillside. I am telling you, man, I swear to God, I will not walk past cemeteries anymore. My name's Kevin Rowe. I'm from a little place outside Blackwater, Louisiana, just past the parish line where the road dips and floods when it rains. And I work as the groundskeeper for the cemetery out there. The one behind the old church with the rust on the bell and the swamp pressing in on all sides. And I need you to listen to me because it is after 3 a.m. right now. And I am sitting in my car by that same fence with the engine off, watching my battery light come on and go off. And if I go home without saying this out loud, one time I do not think I will sleep at all, not even for a minute. Today was like every other day. That is the part that bothers me the most. How normal it started, because I woke up in that trailer they put on stilts behind the maintenance shed. And the first thing I remember is the sound of the window unit rattling and not doing much, and the taste of yesterday's coffee on my tongue before I even got out of bed. And when I finally sat up, the digital clock on the milk crate next to my mattress said 5:17, that ugly green light, and I thought I had another 10 minutes before the alarm. But then I remembered I never said it last night. I pulled on the same work pants I always wear, the dark ones with the grass stains around the cuffs that do not come out anymore, and the gray shirt with my last name stitched on a patch over the chest. Row W in red thread that is starting to fray. And there is a little brown spot near the buttons from when I dropped gravy on it a few weeks back. I told myself again I should ask Mr. Dalton for a new shirt, but I never do. I just keep washing this one and putting it back on. I boiled eggs last night like I always do, so I peeled 2 of them over the sink and ate them standing there while the coffee machine dripped slow, watching a line of tiny ants move along the crack where the counter pulls away from the wall. I put the same thing in my cooler as I always do. 2 ham sandwiches in plastic bags, 1 apple that has a soft spot on one side, and that little carton of chocolate milk I buy from the gas station because it makes the afternoon go easier. And I checked my phone, and it was 5:42 when I stepped off the trailer steps, and the boards creaked under my weight. The air already felt wet, even though the sun was not up yet. The kind of heavy air that sticks to you and makes your shirt feel wrong on your back. And the frogs out by the ditch were still loud. I walked past the maintenance shed, unlocked it, switched on the light, and it flickered twice before it stayed on and showed me the same tools leaning in the same places. The mower, the trimmer, the shovels stacked in the corner, the dirt on the floor that never really sweeps up clean. It smelled like gas and old grass and that oily smell from the chainsaw. I pulled the work log off the nail on the wall and checked the notes from yesterday, and I had written my own handwriting back at myself. Level plot 19. After storm, check south fence, sinkhole. And then under that from the office lady, there was a note. City called about complaint. Someone said, family plot sank. Please address. It was what I expected because we had that big storm 2 nights ago. The one that made the water in the ditch slap up against the culvert and made the church parking lot look like a shallow pond when the lightning flashed. When it rains here, the graves on the lower side swell and settle and sometimes lean, and it is my job to smooth them, add dirt, seed grass, make it look like nothing strange ever happens to the ground. I punched in on the old rusty time clock they keep on the back wall, even though nobody checks it much, and the stamp said 5:59. And I remember thinking I cut it close but was still on time. I took the small gator cart instead of the pickup because the ground was soft, and I loaded it with the flat shovel, the tamping tool, a bag of dry dirt, and the little level I used to make sure stones do not lean too much. The sky was just a lighter shade of black when I drove out past the back of the church and through the metal gate into the cemetery. The gate squealed the same way it always does, and I told myself again I should oil it. And as the tires rolled over the gravel, I could hear it crunch under me. That sound I used to like because it meant I was alone and the day was starting slow. That cemetery is not big, not like the ones you see in cities. It is a small town place with old headstones leaning different ways, angels with broken noses, some names worn down so much I have to squint to make them out when people ask, and plastic flowers stuck into the ground that have faded to the same grayish color. There is a low chain link fence on the side that faces the road, and on the other sides, it just gives up to the swamp. Trees with roots in the water, and that green film on top that looks solid until you step in it and go down to your knees. There is a smell that hangs there most mornings. Part wet dirt, part rotting leaves, part something metal from the water. And it was the same smell this morning, nothing special. I parked the gator near the newer section where the numbers are painted on small metal stakes so I can match them to the map in the office, and I found the little sign that said 19 in black. The grass there was still damp from the storm, and my boots sank a little as I walked. When I looked at the grave, man, my stomach felt strange right away, even though I told myself it was just the coffee. The dirt over that plot was pushed up higher than it should have been, like someone had turned the mound over from underneath. I know what settled ground looks like. I have been doing this job for years, and this was not that. The top of the mound had cracked, long lines from one side to the other, and it looked dry on top, even though everything around it was wet. The headstone itself, a plain gray one with simple letters, had tilted forward more than yesterday, and there was a small gap at the base where I could see dark dirt and a hint of something pale. And that is where I looked away on purpose. I checked the tag by the stone to make sure I had the right one. Lot 19, last name Gerard, first name Annette, year of death 1893. It is one of the oldest graves they still keep up in that section. I had tamped that mound down just 2 days ago, right before the storm hit, I remember, because I ate my second egg sitting right on the edge of that plot, and it had been smooth and low then. Now it looked raised and cracked like a loaf of bread someone overbaked. I am not supposed to think in pictures like that, I know, but that is what came to mind, and I pushed it away. I told myself the water table did something weird during the storm. Maybe the coffin shifted and the ground moved. That happens sometimes. It looks strange. You fix it and move on. That is the job. So I set the level up against the stone and saw how far off it was. And I told myself I would log that, and maybe we would need to brace it later. And I took the shovel and started slicing off the top of the mound to even it out. The shovel went in easier than I expected. The dirt soft, and there was a smell when I turned the first scoop, a kind of wet, old smell. Not strong, just wrong in a way I cannot explain. I looked around then, just out of habit, but there was nobody there. Just a couple of blackbirds on the far row and the crooked cross on the tallest stone near the oak tree. I kept working. I shaved the mound down, pulled the dirt into the wheelbarrow, tamped what was left like I always do, pressing the ground flat, feeling it solid under the tool. It is simple work, but when you do it right, the ground feels honest under your feet after. Today, it did not. Every time I tamped one spot smooth, another spot next to it seemed to rise a little. Not much, just enough that I would see a small crack appear again. I thought maybe I was imagining it. I was sleeping bad this week, waking up 2 or 3 times every night because of the thunder and the wind shaking the trailer. So I told myself my eyes were playing tricks. And I kept at it until my arms were tired and sweat was running down my back, even though the sun had barely come up. Finally, I got the surface mostly level, and I patted it with the flat of the shovel and said out loud, "That will do," the way I always do when I finish a plot. I checked my watch. It was 7:12. The church parking lot was still empty. No cars, no people, just that hollow quiet you get between the frogs, going quiet and the birds really starting in. I drove back to the shed, logged what I did, and then went about the rest of my day, trimming around the newer stones, picking up faded plastic flowers that had blown over, fixing the little flags in the veterans section that always lean after a storm. Normal things, ordinary things. I ate my first sandwich leaning against the back of the shed at 11:30, watching a dragonfly hover over a puddle, not thinking about Lot 19 at all. The first truly wrong thing did not happen until after lunch. Around 2, the office lady, Carla, called me on the radio. Her voice crackled and she said, "Kevin, the city called again. They say that family grave by the tree looks bad. Did you fix it?" I told her yes, I did it first thing. It is good now. She was quiet for a second and then said, "Well, someone just drove by and took a picture and sent it in. And they say the ground looks like a bad molehill. Their words, not mine. Can you go look again?" I remember looking at the sky, bright and hot and blue, and I almost told her I had other jobs, but it is my work. So I said, "I am going now." I took the gator back out. Same route, same gate squeal, same crunch of gravel, and when I turned into the row where 19 is, my hands went cold on the wheel. The mound was back, higher than before. I had cleaned it that morning, you have to believe me. It was flat, I tamped it down, and now at 2 in the afternoon it was raised again. The dirt cracked in a different pattern, like something under it had pushed up hard and then stopped. There were footprints in the damp grass around it. More than just mine, small ones and big ones. Some half prints, like whoever made them, did not finish the step. I got out and looked around, expecting to see someone. Maybe the family that had complained, maybe kids playing a prank. But the whole place was empty. No cars by the church, no one on the road. Just that heat that makes the air wobble and the sound of one crow in the tree. I walked closer and saw something that made my chest feel tight. Near the base of the stone, right where that gap had been, was a little line in the dirt, a groove that ran from under the stone down the mound and into the grass. Thin but deep, like something hard had been dragged along the soil from inside, pushing outward. I crouched down and touched it with my fingers. The dirt was dry and warm on top, but under it, in the groove, it was cooler, almost damp. My hand shook. I told myself the coffin shifted. Maybe one of the metal pieces scraped. I know how they look inside. I have seen coffins before they go in the ground. They have handles and braces, and sometimes they rust and move. That was an explanation I could hold on to, so I took it. I told myself not to be a child, not to start making stories about things. I shook my head and started the whole process over again. I shaved the mound, moved the dirt, tamped it. Harder this time, sweating so much my shirt stuck to my chest. I even went back to the shed and brought out extra dirt, the thick kind we use to fill sinkholes, and I added that over the top so it would pack down solid. By the time I was done, the grave looked good. If you drove by from the road, you would not see anything strange, just one more old stone in a row of old stones. I stepped back, wiped my forehead, and said, "There, that is that." Kind of talking to the stone, kind of talking to myself. I checked my watch, 3:06. A mosquito landed on my hand, and I slapped it and left a little smear of blood that might have been mine. Might not. I walked the rest of the grounds after that and tried not to think about it. I cleaned the trash can by the side gate. I fixed the bent hinge on the tool locker behind the columbarium. I said hello to an older man visiting his wife's grave and answered his question about where the new section was going to be if the town ever approved it. Little things. The sun dropped a little. The shadows of the stones got longer and sharper. I put the tools away around 4:30, signed the log, and was about to lock up when I heard it for the first time. It was a sound like something heavy sliding across wet boards, only slower, with a little stop and start in it. A drag, stop, drag. Stop sound, coming from the direction of the back fence where the swamp water comes right up to the last row. I stood in the doorway of the shed and listened, and for a second, I thought it was a boat maybe, someone pulling a pirogue through the shallows. But it did not have the right rhythm, and there was no motor sound, no voices, just that dragging. I told myself it was a branch in the water, stirred up by a fish or something, and I went to lock the shed anyway, but my hand missed the lock the first time because it shook. I drove the gator back to the trailer, cooked a frozen dinner in the microwave, and turned on the small television I keep on a crate, but I could not tell you what I watched. It was just noise and light. My mind kept going back to that mound, how fast it had come back up, how wrong the dirt felt under the tamping tool. I told myself I would check it one more time before dark, just to prove to myself it was fine. That was the mistake. Man, I swear to God, that was the moment I should have just stayed inside. I grabbed my flashlight from the hook by the door, even though there was still some light outside, and I walked on foot this time, past the shed, through the gate, into the rows that are so familiar to me, I could walk them with my eyes closed. The light was that late kind, where everything looks sharper but also flat, and the shadows between stones look darker than they should. The air had cooled a little, but it was still heavy. When I turned the corner and saw Lot 19 again, my legs all but stopped. The mound was higher than it had been even at 2. The dirt bulged in the middle and had cracked open in one long line, straight from the headstone to the far edge. And down in that crack, the earth was black. Not just dark, but black in a way that made me think of deep water, even though I knew it was just dirt. The headstone had come forward another inch, leaning so far that I put my hand out to steady it on instinct, like it was going to fall. When I touched the stone, it felt warm, warmer than the air, and I pulled my hand back quick. My flashlight was still hanging at my side, but I clicked it on then anyway, shining it right into the crack. The beam caught something pale down there. Not wood, not rock, something with lines in it. I told myself, coffin lid. You are seeing the edge of the coffin lid. That is all. The dirt shifted, and now you can see where the box is, and you need to call the office and tell them we might have to reset the burial. That is what I should have done probably, just turned around and used the phone in the trailer. But instead, I knelt down and set the flashlight near the crack so it shone in, and I started working the shovel around the edges, taking off dirt in careful slices. There are rules about exhuming and disturbing graves, I know that. I am not supposed to open anything without paperwork, but I told myself I was just relieving pressure on the coffin so it would not break. I told myself I was preventing a bigger problem. As I worked, I became aware of the sound again, that dragging, only fainter now, and I realized I could hear it even though I was not near the fence or the water. It seemed to come through the ground itself, a slow scrape under my knees, through the handle of the shovel. I stopped. The sound did not stop. I held my breath and listened. Drag. Stop, drag, stop, like someone with no strength left pulling something behind them, inch by inch. I said out loud, "Is someone there?" Which is a stupid thing to say because of course nobody answered, and the sound went on the same. I wanted to stand up, to back away, but my eyes stayed on that crack in the earth and the pale thing showing through. I dug more. The dirt came away in clumps that stuck together, even though the top layer was dry. Every shovelful I moved seemed to make the sound clearer, like it was not coming from a distance anymore, but from right under the spot where I was working. Finally, I put the shovel down and used my hands, scraping the dirt away from the top of the coffin. Because that is what it was. I could see the wood now, or what was left of it. It was old, darker than most, with iron nails that showed as little orange flecks. There should not have been that much of it visible, not if the grave had been set right, but there it was, barely a foot below the surface in places. I brushed my fingers across it, and the wood felt swollen and soft in some places, hard in others, like parts of it were new somehow. My hand found a line across the middle, not lengthwise like the lid edge should be, but crosswise, a shallow groove cut into the wood. It ran from one side to the other, and when I curled my fingers into it, they fit almost perfectly, like it had been made by something with hands, dragging over and over in the same path. I jerked my hand back, heart pounding. I told myself it was just water damage, that the wood grains had lifted and formed that pattern. But even as I said it in my head, I did not believe it. I picked up the flashlight and shone it closer, right along the line. There were smaller lines within it, 4 in a row, then a gap, then 4 more, shallow but sharp at the edges. And at the end of the groove, they hooked down slightly, like whatever made them had curled at the last pull. I know what scratches from tools look like. These were not that. I stood up so fast I almost spilled the light into the hole. I told myself I was done, that I had seen enough, that I would call someone in the morning and they could bring in a crew and deal with it. The dragging sound had stopped at some point, and I only noticed when the silence came down heavy on me, thick and full, even though there were still birds somewhere and a car far away on the road. It felt like the cemetery was holding its breath. I stepped back from the grave, and that was when the headstone moved. It was small, but I saw it, the top edge shifting another fraction forward, the base rocking in the dirt I had only this morning packed tight, and a fresh crack opened between the base and the mound with a soft crumble sound. I am telling you, man, the stone moved like someone under it had pressed up against it. I backed up another step. My boot heel caught the edge of a lower stone behind me, and I almost went over. I did not fall, though. I caught myself and stood there panting, staring at that grave. I wanted to run. Every part of me said, turn around and run back to the trailer and shut the door and turn on all the lights. But I did not. I walked around instead, slow, checking the other graves, checking the ground, trying to prove to myself that if something strange was happening, it was happening everywhere, that it was something with the soil or the water table. All the other mounds looked the way they should. Some had settled a little, some leaned, some were damp, some dry, but none of them bulged up like 19. None of them had cracks that went straight to the coffin. None of them made my skin crawl when I looked at them. I went back to the grave again because I could not help it. The flashlight beam shook in my hand. The groove on the coffin lid seemed deeper now, even though I knew that was not possible. I told the air, I am going now. I said it like I was talking to a person, and I picked up the shovel and jammed it upright into the dirt at the foot of the grave so I could find it easily in the morning. Then I left. I walked back to the trailer, went inside, and locked the door. Even though I never lock it usually, I turned on the television again and let it talk at me while I made another coffee, even though it was after 6. I held the mug, but did not drink much. At some point, it got dark outside. The frogs started up again. The air conditioner rattled and hummed and pushed out air that did not feel any cooler. I told myself I would not look out the window. I looked out the window anyway. From my trailer, you can see the tops of the stones in the older section if you angle your head, just the pale shapes against the darker grass, and beyond them, the line of trees and the shine of the swamp when the moon is out. Tonight, there was a gray light from behind the clouds, just enough to show the outline of things. And in that light, I thought I saw the ground near the oak tree shifting, a slow rise and fall, like someone under a blanket breathing. I blinked. It did not do it again. I told myself my eyes were tired. I closed the curtain. I tried to watch a game show. I do not remember the questions. I must have dozed in the chair because the next thing I knew, my phone screen lit up on the crate and it said 127, bright in the dark. And the television had gone to that quiet late night commercial that loops the same images. The air felt wrong somehow, thicker, and there was no frog noise at all. The silence woke me more than anything. It was the same kind of silence as earlier at the grave, full and heavy. My first thought was that the power had gone out, because it gets like that when everything shuts off. But the window unit was still humming, and the little light on the microwave was on. The sound that replaced the frogs came a few seconds later. It was the dragging again, only louder now, clearer, coming from outside, from the direction of the cemetery. Drag. Stop. Drag, stop. With just enough pause to make you picture the effort in between. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a big one, a gator moving through the grass, hauling itself from one low, wet spot to another. The trailers here get things under them sometimes. Raccoons, strays, even once a hog. I listened for the scrape on the stilts that would mean something was under my floor, but the sound stayed at a distance. Not under me, not right at the wall, just out in the direction of the stones. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself stories about gators and branches and anything else. It kept going, slow, steady, coming closer. I stood up without wanting to. My legs just did it. I found myself walking to the window, fingers on the curtain. I did not want to look, but I also could not stand not knowing if something out there was moving. I pulled the curtain back a little and looked through the glass. At first, I did not see anything. The graves were there, in the gray light, rows of them, leaning and straight, some with flowers that looked black in the dim. The trees were still. The swamp water had a narrow line of reflected sky. Nothing moved. I almost let myself believe it had all been in my head, that the dragging was my own heartbeat. Then my eyes went to the left, to the row where 19 sits, and I saw it. The ground around that grave was disturbed, not in straight lines like mower marks, but in a wide, messy half circle, lighter where the sod had been pulled back, darker where the dirt underneath had been turned. The mound itself looked taller. I could tell even from here, and there was something leaning against the headstone, something long and dark. For a second, I thought it was a branch that had fallen from the oak. Then it moved. It did not move much, just a small shift, and the headstone rocked with it. The dragging sound came again, and I realized I had been watching the shovel. The shovel I had left stuck in the ground at the foot of the grave was now at the side, its handle pressed between the stone and the earth, and it was moving down, inch by inch, like someone unseen was pulling on it from the coffin side, trying to wedge it further under the base. The metal blade scraped along the stone every few seconds. That was the sound. Drag, stop, drag, stop. I swear to God, there was no one there. Nobody standing by the grave, nobody crouched, nobody moving around in the grass. Just that tool shifting on its own, fighting the weight of the stone. I dropped the curtain. I backed away until my calves hit the chair. My heart was beating so fast, I felt it in my throat. I said out loud, "No, no," like that would make it stop. The dragging went on a little longer, maybe half a minute, maybe more. Then there was a dull thud that I felt more than heard, through the stilts and the floor. And then nothing. The frogs did not start again. The silence stayed. I did not look out the window anymore. I sat in the chair with the television still glowing and my hands pressed together so tight my knuckles hurt. I told myself I was going to wait until morning and then I was going to quit this job. Tell Mr. Dalton I could not do it anymore. Let someone else cut the grass around those stones. I thought if I just got through the night, I could make it a thing in the past. But the night did not just pass. It did something to my head. I do not know how long I sat there before I realized I was hearing something else. At first I thought it was the wind, but the trees outside were not moving. Then I thought it was the television, but when I hit the power button, the sound stayed. It was the soft rattle of something against the underside of the trailer, a light, uneven tapping, like someone was brushing handfuls of dirt upward against the floorboards. Not hard enough to bang, just enough to let me know where they were. The pats moved from one side of the trailer to the other, slow, thinking, as if whoever did it was learning the shape of the place I sleep. I sat there, not breathing, feeling each touch through my feet. I wanted to run outside and shine the flashlight under the trailer and prove it was an animal. I did not move. I think I knew on some level that whatever I would see would not make me feel better. The tapping stopped near the corner where my bed sits. It stayed there, quiet, like something deciding. I whispered, "Stop, please stop," not even sure who I was talking to. There was one last slow scrape, straight along the bottom of the floor, and then it was over. The frogs did not come back. The night did not go back to normal. It just went gray around the edges until the digital clock said 3:03, and the sky at the window was less black, more like charcoal. That is when I could not stand it anymore, and I took my keys and my phone and came out here to the car, parked where I can see the fence, but not the graves themselves if I do not turn my head too much. That is where I am now, engine off so I do not waste the battery. Just the dome light on for a while earlier until it shut itself off. Every time a little noise happens, a branch shift or a bird, I jump. I keep thinking about that grave. You probably think the next part of the story is me going back in daylight, opening it up all the way, finding something down there with answers. That is not what happened. When the office opens and the sun is up enough, I will call and tell them there is a problem with Lot 19 and we need a crew and permits. They will bring people in fancy coveralls and masks, and they will set up a canopy, and they will move the headstone and dig with shoring boards and all of that. And they will maybe tell me about rotten wood and gases and shifting soil, and I will nod and agree and sign papers. I do not think any of that will change what I already saw. I saw claw marks on the inside of a coffin lid that is too close to the surface. I saw a tool move on its own like a hand was on it, working for hours I could not see. I heard something drag itself through the ground from the swamp side to under my trailer. There is something else too, something that will not leave my head. After I saw the mound rise the second time, when I went back to the shed for extra dirt, I had to check the burial book. You know, the big one with all the scrawled names and dates. The records from before they digitized anything. I flipped to the page with the older plots, found the line for Lot 19, and it was there just like always. Gerard, Annette, 1893. Interred, no exhumation. I remember tracing the letters with my finger. Then, later, after I had seen the coffin lid, after I had watched the shovel move, something in me needed to see that line again. Like maybe there would be a note I had missed. When I opened the book a second time, the page looked the same at first. But when I found 19, there was a faint line through the name. Not a clean crossout, just a light line, like someone started to strike it and stopped halfway. Next to it, in different ink, were 3 letters. That did not match any code I know, not the usual abbreviations for moved or cremated or anything. Just 3 letters that looked more like someone's hand slipping than writing. I blinked and looked again, and the line was gone. The letters were gone. Just the name, plain like always. Maybe I saw it wrong. Maybe I am tired. But now, every time I shut my eyes, I see that line go through her name again, faint but sure. Like the record itself is trying to erase who we think is down there. The thing that bothers me most is not what I saw, but what it all means when I put it together. If that coffin is really that close to the surface, if it keeps rising every time it rains, if something inside has been dragging at the lid enough to leave marks, then how long has it been doing that? How many storms? How many times did I tamp that ground flat and walk away while something under it pushed up inch by inch? I see now all the days I walked past that grave with my trimmer over my shoulder, thinking about lunch or the game, not looking too close, while fingers were maybe less than a foot below my boot heel. I cannot prove any of this. In the morning, if I sleep at all, I will be the tired middle-aged man telling a story about noises and shifting dirt. And people will nod and say the bayou does strange things with the ground. They will say coffins float when the water rises. They will have explanations that sound neat. I am not asking you to fix it. I am not even sure why I am saying it all, except that it feels like if I keep it inside any longer, it will do to me what that grave did to the dirt, push everything else out of the way, and rise until it cracks the surface. I know one thing for sure now, and that is that I am not going to be able to walk across a cemetery the same way again. I used to cut across other burial grounds when I visited my sister in another town, because it was quicker than going around, a straight line from one street to the next. I would read names on stones without thinking. I cannot imagine doing that now. If I see headstones from the road, I will turn down a different street, even if it adds time. If someone I care about has a funeral here, I do not know if I can stand by the grave and watch them lower the box, knowing what the ground can do later. I used to look down when I walked between rows, so I would not trip. Now I will be looking down for different reasons, watching for cracks, for bulges, for any sign that the earth is not finished with what it was given. And every time it rains and I feel the trailer shake just a little on the stilts, I will be listening for that dragging under the waterlogged soil, that slow drag stop, wondering if the thing that got a little closer tonight is patient enough to wait out the rest of my life.